Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you all here at the conference called Root Causes of Unavailability and Delay of Innovative Medicines in Czechia and EU, organized for you by the Association of Innovative Pharmaceutical Industry in the Czech Republic with the support of EFPIA, meaning European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. And I should not forget, under the auspices of the State Institute for Drug Control. We've met last year to discuss the pharmaceutical strategy for EU, and now we have it, finally. Or at least we have a proposal for a new directive and a new regulation which revise and replace the existing general pharmaceutical legislation. We also have the newest report of Charles River Associates on the root causes of delays and unavailability of innovative medicines in EU member states' markets. And today we are going to discuss what solutions are there to minimize the delays of treatment and medicines and to have, let's say, equal access in all EU countries. We will have two blocks. As you found out already, the first one will be all in English, which is also a message for you who is with us online, because this conference is hybrid. You may either watch us in English or you may choose Czech language for the whole conference. So the first part will be about where we are now, what proposals are there on the table, so what changes are there ahead of us. And the second part will be about the specifics and challenges for Czech Republic. There we start in English, but we'll continue with panel discussion that will be held in Czech. So there we'll switch into Czech because we'll be concentrating or focusing more on the Czech specifics. And through the whole event, there is a place for you to take part actively by asking questions. You may use Slido as we normally do, so you just need your clever device, your smart device, to connect to the internet, find Slido website and sign into our event with the hashtag MA2023, or easier for you is to open the folder you found on your chairs, and as the first page there you'll see the program of the conference with a QR code that will get you easily straight to Slido, where you may ask your questions or support a question of someone who have asked it before. Just an information. At the first part, the questions we'll be collecting through the whole time, and we'll finish the first block with question and answers with Q&A. So even though we will be not answering your questions at the beginning, don't hesitate to ask one more question because we'll get to it later on. And yes, what we are going to focus on today more in detail, we'll get to know from the host, from David Kolář, the Executive Director of the Association of Innovative Pharmaceutical Industry, who will dive more into our topic and explains why we are here today. David.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning from my side. I will maybe a little bit, adapt it. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to welcome all of you in the beautiful venue of the Manes Gallery. And I'm really happy that today's conference brought so many of you in the room, because the room is entirely full, and also with a number of colleagues who are watching us online. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Association of the Innovative Pharmaceutical Industry, the local Czech National Trade Association and the branch of the EFPIA. And we are currently associating 35 innovative member companies who are active on the Czech market. Today's topic, as Michala already said, is are the root causes of the different availability or unavailability of the innovative medicinal products within the EU member states. I think that most of you remember that we focused as an AIFP during the Czech presidency on this topic already, and we organized 4 international conferences. And there was, I think, one question or one topic which was repeatedly said: why there are inequalities, different conditions, different timelines, and everything like this within the EU markets. We were discussing with the stakeholders, we were trying to find the solutions. EFPIA brought some of the proposals how to solve the situation, and you will hear about it during the conference. But we heard also that the proposal of the revision of the general pharmaceutical legislation by Commission will bring the solutions as well. Well, we are a little bit lucky because there were several postponements of the publication of this proposal, and the final one was published 1 month before this conference. So now it's really the priority topic number 1, I think, and it's really the legislation which can influence the European pharmaceutical market and also innovations in Europe for the next 20 years. The proposal is quite broad and it's complex, and it's necessary to see that there are also interconnections with another parts of the EU legislation. So it takes time, definitely, to see all of potential negative or positive impacts which it can be caused by this one. The proposal itself is having hundreds of pages, so really it needs to take time to analyze everything inside. But there is still this pending question. Is there a potential that this proposal will close the gap between the EU markets from the perspective of the access to innovation? Well, I hope that today we will hear some of the opinions, maybe some of the analysis and some first thoughts from different stakeholders, and we'll be closer to find the answer to this one. I'm really grateful that we have such a strong and powerful panel of speakers and panelists. I'm looking forward to the discussions because our invitation was accepted by the colleagues from the European Commission, European Parliament, my colleagues from EFPIA, also Chartered Associates, and from our local colleagues and stakeholders, the Ministry of Health, State Institute for Drug Control, colleagues from the ČAVO, the patient organizations, also the biggest health insurance company in the Czech Republic. My colleague Pavel Sedláček, the chairman of the AIFP board, will be part of the panelist table as well. And I would like to express my personal gratitude to the director of the State Institute for Drug Control, Ms. Irena Storová, because she accepted also a request to take the auspices over this conference. So thank you very much. And I wish all of you and all of us, because I'm looking forward to the conference as well, the good meeting, the interesting discussions, and I hope that you will be active audience, as Michala already said. Please put there your questions. We got great speakers, so it could be interesting discussion, and you are part of it, or I hope that you will be. And with this, I would like to pass my word to Director Irena Storová, and thank you very much.
David Kolář, Executive Director of AIFP. Thank you. And yeah, let me welcome Irena Storová, the Director of the State Institute for Drug Control of the Czech Republic, to welcome you all here as well.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen and dear guests, it's my honor to be among those who can welcome you today to this conference. On behalf of the State Institute for Drug Control, under whose auspices this event is held, I would like to thank you, the Association of Innovative Pharmaceutical Industry, for giving us the opportunity to discuss important topics and view them also from other than our own point of view. Such discussions are even more important now when we are facing new challenges. At the end of April, the European Commission published so-called pharmaceutical package, which is the largest reform of the general pharmaceutical legislation, I think, in over 20 years. SUCL feels the necessity to review the pharmaceutical legislation, mainly when it comes to long-lasting problems with availability of medicines. As regulators, we approach the proposal rather as a technical piece of legislation, and we don't comment on its political aspects because it's not our competence. From the practical point of view, we can support rules for electronic package leaflets, streamlined regulatory framework for marketing authorization applications, or incentives for early entry of innovative medicines on the market in all member states. On the other hand, the proposed system of vouchers in the area of novel antimicrobials should be better defined. Within the framework of the General Pharmaceutical Review, it will be necessary to find a balanced compromise between incentives and support or innovative products and generic products market, including compromise of the regulatory data protection. I cannot miss out that the Czech Republic, just like other European countries, is tackling problems with availability of medicines. The State Institute for Drug Control is very active in this area, and important tool for us is granting approval for foreign language batches of the medicinal products. Since 2019, we have approved altogether 169 batches, and in many cases, it was for the first time that the medicine was placed on the market. It means that the process was significantly faster without necessity to provide availability of Czech packaging. There are also medicines which are marketing solely as foreign language batches by means of repeated applications. New medicinal products pending authorization are often available through compassionate use or early access programs, and this is also one of the tools improving accessibility to patients. As a medicines agency, which is responsible also for determination of prices and conditions of reimbursement of medicines, we have done maximum to significantly accelerate the administrative procedures for new products or new indications. We have cut the period for preparation of the assessment report by more than half, and we have also reduced the time needed to issue decisions. Today, we will be talking about patient access to new medicines and what can affect it. That's why I think it is the right moment now to remind us of a few key recent milestones in the area of pricing and reimbursement. In 2018 and 19, SUKL took several measures to deal with, until then, unpredictable timelines of the assessment phase within the HTA process, potentially affecting patient access to new medicines. These actions took almost immediate effect, and since 2019, the time between application date and date of our assessment report has been significantly shortened. Based on our statistic, it took in average more than 300 days for SUKL to publish the first assessment report in 2017. Since 2020, it has been only around 125 days. This means the time span was, thanks to the internal remedials implemented, reduced by 60%. I would like to highlight that the time for the first reaction, mainly additional carries from SUKL to the companies to elaborate more the submitted evidence, is even much shorter. I truly believe I can call this a great success. In 2019 and 20, we aimed at improving the transparency of SUKL's requirements on the evidence that should be submitted with the application for reimbursement of medicines. All stakeholders were invited to provide their inputs when new submission templates and new assessment report templates were being prepared. SUKL also started to publish brief executive summaries for the general public. In 2022, an important amendment to the law on health insurance came into effect that introduced new pathway for orphan medicines. As for decision-making, this represents a new concept which we are all currently learning. Until today, binding statements have issued in 6 procedures by the Minister of Health. We believe this new type of procedure sets the stakeholders' roles the day they should be, and it will make our patient access to orphan medicines better in the end. I would like to thank to all partners and stakeholders for the current and ongoing cooperation, and also to my colleagues for their hard work done, and especially to Milan Vocelka. Thank you very much. I could continue even longer, but I know that the topics I have mentioned will be discussed in detail today, and I am looking forward to our discussion and a contribution from your side. For me, and I believe that also for you, today's conference will be of great benefit. I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Irena Storová, Director of the State Institute for Drug Control, who went over the last 5 years, or nearly 5 years, of the development of the regulatory framework for entering or the access to the market for new pharmaceutical medicines. And now we are going to have a look at outlining the issues and current state of play. Finally, as we've heard, there is a proposal for a new pharma package. And as we are focusing on the access of the innovative medicine and treatment to the market, I hope we will get to know the perspective of the European Commission on that. Now, from Anthony Rodiadis, Deputy Director at DG SANTE, responsible for health systems and medicines, who is a member of the team, or the legal drafting team that prepared the reform of the EU legislative framework on pharmaceuticals, and who is connected with us now from Brussels. So let me welcome Anthony Rodiadis here with us, and I hope we can hear each other. Hello?
Good morning from Brussels. I hope you can hear me well.
Great, we may, so that's now on you. The stage goes for you. The stage is
Thank you. Thank you very much again for this kind invitation, which builds on our previous discussion on access to medicines. Now we have the proposal for the reform out, which as was stated, is as wide as it is deep. So it will take some time for digestion, let's say, from the different stakeholders. But I'm very happy to be here to present its main parts, and I will focus today on the access part of the reform, given the topic of our discussion. But before that, I would just like to give a little bit of an overview of what we have on the table at the moment. So on the 26th of April, the College of the Commission basically adopted a 4-part package, which consisted of a chapeau communication, which essentially explains the contents and how they link together. The main parts of this package is a new proposal for a regulation where we have the rules on centralized marketing authorization. It basically repeals the old 726. It also contains the rules on orphan medicines, certain specific rules on antimicrobials, and I will talk about that in a minute. The security of supply and shortages, but also the rules establishing and revising, let's say, the structure of the European Medicines Agency. At the same time, the main corpus of the rules on authorization of medicines is contained in the new proposal for a directive, which replaces 2001/83. And this, of course, is all the rules that have to do with the placing of medicines on the market, its authorization requirements, labeling requirements, pharmacovigilance requirements, all the access and incentives, let's say, rules on medicines, how generics come to the market, etc. So essentially, the structure, this two-pillar structure remains as we have today, with a difference that all the rules on the pediatric medicines and orphan medicines are now integrated in these two pillars. At the same time, the package included a commission recommendation for council recommendation by the commission on AMR, where essentially there's different targets set, but also actions that can be taken up by the member states at national level to help fight antimicrobial resistance. So without further ado, the political objectives, or so let's say the 6 main objectives of this reform have to do with access to medicines. This has been a main challenge and is still at the very heart of what this is about. And I will focus on that in a minute. But it goes in other areas as well. There are rules that have to do with shortages, with more stringent obligations in terms of reporting shortages that would be foreseeable, let's say. There are rules that have to do with the affordability of medicines, and essentially affordability is tackled indirectly through the earlier and quicker, let's say, entry into the market of off-patent medicines where this is possible. Part of this is also the revision of the so-called Bolar article, where we are essentially looking for day one access of off-patent medicines to the market, essentially closing down the time between actual authorization of a generic medicine and the time it can actually come on the shelves. The competitiveness of the regulatory framework is a very important part of this reform, and it includes a lot of future-proofing, let's say, elements which have to do with a new regulatory pathway for emergencies, the temporary emergency marketing authorization. There's a provision on sandboxes so that our system is able to accommodate new concepts that are not readily, let's say, ready for the framework that we have, so that we can accommodate and pilot certain new concepts. We have provisions for early scientific advice that would help marketing authorization applicants understand what are the requirements for their application. Advice on regulatory status of products years before they even come for a marketing authorization. There's also shortened assessment times foreseen for regulators to provide scientific assessment and marketing authorization, so that we can also close the gap with other regions of the world and make our system faster, so that the medicines can be authorized more quickly. There's a significant reduction in administrative burden in terms of elimination of duplicative processes and different requirements that didn't help, at least for instance, there's the elimination of the so-called sunset clause. There is no longer a requirement for a renewal in most cases of a marketing authorization. That also was a source of administrative burden and cost for industry. And of course, I mentioned this earlier, there is a substantial reform to how the European Medicines Agency is structured and operates, so that it can better utilize talent and pool talent from the different parts of the network. But on the other hand, reduce the multitude of committees that we had today to have 2 main committees that would be assessing medicines and also for the pharmacovigilance. And then the expertise of the rest of the committees is not lost, but is used in a structure that is explained in the reform. And just one last thing in terms of combating AMR, there are very specific rules that are twofold essentially. One, of course, focusing on prudent use and additional measures that have to do with prudent use of existing antimicrobials, and of course, the particular incentives to overcome this market failure we're seeing in antimicrobials. So we have this voucher system that has been adopted by the Commission as a potential tool in a toolkit against AMR. Now, focusing specifically on the access part, I'm not going to stay a lot here. It's basically to highlight the problem, which I think we're all in agreement. There is today, unfortunately, a very big discrepancy, and this is also part of what our evaluation showed, a discrepancy of access across the EU, where certain member states see more quickly and more broadly different medicines on the market, and then other parts of the EU, patients in other parts of the EU, seeing those medicines come much later or not at all. And this has been underscored as a huge problem of the current system, where the current system hasn't been really delivering a real single market in medicines in the European Union. So it is a clear political objective that there cannot be second-class patients in the EU, and no one should be left behind. So what are the measures envisaged for that? Well, essentially, we're talking about a reset of the system in terms of how we think about access. Access, I mean, up until now, medicines were authorized on the basis of their scientific merit, and then it was really up to business decisions on, whether they would be placed on the market, and of course, the national pricing, reimbursement, and the HTA processes were very important, instrumental to bringing also those medicines to the market. So what we're trying to do through this revision, it's basically a regulatory revision. So you cannot solve issues that have to do with pricing and reimbursements, because these are really national remit, but you can be an enabler through this reform to connect the dots, if you will, so that this access chain is as quick as possible and reaches as many patients as possible, but most importantly, to achieve a change of mentality, to achieve a cooperative mentality amongst all actors of this access chain, so that the main winner at the end will be the patient. So in terms of particular specific, let's say, measures, there is a change in this one-size-fits-all incentive system that we have today towards a more targeted, modulated approach. What does that mean, essentially? We're modulating the data protection part of the incentives system, whereby today you have, let's say, 8 years of data protection plus 2 years of market protection. Those 8 years, the standard market data protection, is reduced to 6 years. So any innovative medicine would be receiving 6 years of data protection. And then they would be able to build up on this protection if they deliver on important public health goals. So what does that mean? There would be an additional 2 years of data protection if the innovative medicine is placed on all member states where the marketing authorization is valid. So this is an important detail. We're not necessarily talking about 27 member states. For example, if you have, let's say, a decentralized marketing authorization, which is valid in 8 member states, you would need to cover those 8 member states. If, of course, you're talking about a centralized marketing authorization across the EU, you would need to cover all EU 27 in order to get those 2 additional years. At the same time, there is an extension foreseen for medicines that deliver on what we call unmet medical need, and there are certain criteria in the legislation that set the framework on what that would be, and this can be further elaborated through the scientific guidelines from the agency, and that would be in another 6 months of data protection. And on top of that, a company that would be conducting comparative clinical trials for its application based on scientific advice given by the regulators would also be able to get another 6 months. On top of that, of course, there would be the 2 years of market protection that you still have today, and an additional year for an additional indication. This in total, if a company, so the highest ranking players on the market would theoretically be able to get more protection than they have today. So that's actually, it shows that, you know, the system is able to reward companies that really deliver for the patient. At the same time, it's important to highlight that for orphan medicines, there is an additional modulation for the market exclusivity. And in this case, we're essentially talking about 9 years of market exclusivity, which would be, let's say, the standard. And on top of that, 1 year for market launch, 1 year for high unmet medical need, and then up to 2 additional years for additional indication for the product. So that is also a very important, let's say, incentive to produce medicines for rare diseases, which today we see where there is, let's say, still a lot of rare conditions which do not see treatment possibilities, and that's one of the issues we would like to address. Now, just to go a little bit into the specificities of how the market launch conditions would work, because there's a lot of discussion on, you know, is it a predictable system? Is it a system that you know, companies can really make use of, etc. I would like to reassure everyone that, I mean, if you look at the details of how the market launch mechanism works, it's very pragmatic. I mentioned earlier that, you know, we're talking about all the member states where the marketing authorization is valid. So that's one important detail to remember. We're not talking about simple filing. We're talking about a requirement for actual placing on the market and continuous supply to reach the needs of the patients. So you might ask, who defines what this supply is? I mean, how do we even know? Well, essentially, this is a system that works on a statement or certification, let's say, from the particular member states, where the member state essentially has, we call it a 4+1 options. It can either confirm that the medicine, you know, after there was an application for filing reimbursement, and then it was actually placed on the market, so you can give a positive confirmation of actual supply. Or the member state can say, no, unfortunately, we don't have the supply we require for this medicine. So in that case, the incentive would not be given. But there are a lot of cases in between where it would be very possible for a member state and a company to find a middle ground. And here we have the following. It would be possible for a member state, for instance, to give a waiver because, let's say, there are cases where you might need a center of excellence or certain infrastructure to deliver a pharmaceutical to the patients, and those simply do not exist. In this case, the member state is supposed to give a waiver so that it gives the possibility for this infrastructure to be developed. Or it could be the case that member state is not interested at this moment to receive the medicine or would like to wait a bit for the price to fall. And in that case, a waiver would also be the appropriate option so that it doesn't block the data protection extension, but rather allows the possibility for that to happen later. In the case that a member state, for instance, does not react, there is the legislation would foresee a tacit acceptance so that the company would not be blocked in this case either. There is also an additional possibility we have integrated in the legislation, which has to do with the positive pricing and reimbursement decision based on the transparency directive to take into account that process. as well, and also simplify things a bit in case there is a positive reimbursement and pricing decision. There are particular timeframes in which this has to happen. Essentially, we're talking about 2 years. In 2 years, there needs to be actual placing on the market for the bigger companies. This is 3 years for the smaller companies and the SMEs. And then the administrative proof of whether this has happened or not would happen afterwards. So there is sufficient time both for the member states to react, but also for the companies to immediately start the process of launching the products on the market where they are interested in placing the medicine. At the same time, we need to give foreseeability for the off-patent sector, which we have done through integration of at least 2 years of foreseeability for them to know whether or not the data protection has been extended or not. And in this case, they can have a go or no-go decision for a particular market. On the unmet medical needs, I'll just be very brief. It's just an indication of the different criteria that we have used to establish what is an unmet medical need. So essentially, we're talking about a medicine that relates to a life-threatening or severely debilitating condition. And at the same time, no other medicine is authorized for that condition, or there is a medicine authorized in the EU, but the disease is still associated with remaining high morbidity or mortality. And at the same time, this medicine would result in an effective reduction in the morbidity or mortality for the patients involved. And as I said, the EMA would be setting scientific guidelines to give specific examples and consult appropriate stakeholders so that we are covering really all the areas that we need in the EU to effectively push these medicines in these areas of need. Important asterisk here is that all orphan disease medicines would be de facto considered unmet medical need, and this is an important also detail to have in mind. So these are just the highlights of the access measures that we have, and I'm really happy to discuss the different views and reply to any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, this from DG SANTE. Thank you very much, and we will have the discussion because the questions are already arriving to our Slido, but we'll get to that after other presentations because we have a proposal now, but it still needs to pass the European Parliament. And as we've heard at the beginning of Antonio's presentation, it will take some time to digestion of this. So, as we have the European Parliament elections next year, it might be quite tricky. What can we expect in that regard? That's a question for Ondřej Knotek, a member of the European Parliament, a member of the Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, as well as a member of the newly formed Subcommittee on Public Health. So we should be again with the online connection because Ondřej Knotek is also with us from Brussels. Welcome, and the stage is yours.
Many thanks. Just a cross-check. Can you hear me? Obviously, you can see me as well.
Both. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends of European health sector and also of innovative EU. It's a pleasure to be with you. Of course, I'm sorry for not being physically. However, we need to be time to time, as I like to say, in one of our 2 production sites, either in Brussels or in Strasbourg. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here with you physically. So I'm really happy that we have heard this proposal today because it is 20 years. It has been 20 years since the package has been as it has been, and the world has rapidly changed. And for example, the lessons learned from the pandemics, it's not only the possibility to be with you online, which a few years ago was not so easy, but as well, we have learned a lot about the self-sufficiency of all geopolitical players, including Europe, and the word strategical autonomy, or time to time open strategical autonomy, is being spelled and covers all sectors, including health. And when it comes to health, so for me, it is improving the access of patients to medicine and innovative treatment through European-based research and manufacturing, or at least strengthen and boosted European-based manufacturing and research of medicines and innovative treatment. So the key question is, and this is as well what we will be trying to find an answer in European Parliament, is whether the package proposal, to which extent it is able to meet this goal. In European Parliament, it is the environmental committee. This is the committee in charge of this package, actually of two of the proposals, because the Council recommendation, the European Parliament has no say actually there. So it is the ENVI committee, and despite we have the SANTE subcommittee, it's the ENVI. But when I see the names, because both for the directive and the regulation, the reporters and the shadow reporters, the project teams, as I like to say, they are already known. And when I see the names, these are the, I would say, top people with a long proven track record in Parliament in terms of health. So definitely from the side of European Parliament, the activity will not be underestimated. And as correctly outlined, I'm convinced that there will be strong effort to finish before the elections, because always after the elections you can start since the beginning or you can continue. It's always very foggy. However, today we are on the very beginning. We just know the project teams and we don't have exact timeline. On the Council recommendation, as I said, there is no say from the Parliament, I mean legislatively. However, in the SANTE committee, we are drafting a resolution which is not legislatively not binding text, which is dedicated truly to AMR. Last plenary 2 weeks ago, we have had, I would say, intensive debate, and again the engagement of colleagues is I would say severe and sincere. So I believe that Parliament this time be a good and constructive partner. When I see the reporters, so for the directive, it is with the EPP, which is more, I would say, business-oriented political group. The regulation goes to Social Democrats, so we can expect maybe more intervention approach. So we will see where where this will land. But as I said, I believe in very correct approach of Parliament. As there is no clear, there are no clear outputs. We haven't had a serious debate yet. Only when the presentation by commissioner in charge was in Parliament, and it was just 1 hour debate. So maybe I can say my own two or three just quick reactions where I see potential issues with the question in the beginning, whether we will be able to improve the patient access through basically EU-based supply chain and value chain, if possible. And I see, beside that, it is a complex topic, a really complex topic. It needs a lot of studying, and in the Parliament we are in the beginning. I see 2 or 3 points. So when it comes to the notification obligation, 6 months ahead of potential shortage, I mean, I'm trying to think little practically, and to be honest, I'm not convinced that this can vastly improve the situation of the access, because imagine, I don't know how to predict demand changes. We can expect that maybe during winter we will have more need for antibiotics, but this unexpected demand changes, this is something that the manufacturer or the body operator placing on market simply cannot predict and doesn't have it in hands. The same thing, there are maybe more businesses in the chain. So between the manufacturer and the drug consumer or the patient, there are other entities that can have own policies, which could lead to shortage, even though that the one who would be obliged to have this notification and I would say paperwork tasks can simply not influence. So this is something I don't see practical. Maybe in time this will be clarified and it could be okay. Then for the incentives, because this is the key to attract private finance, to attract investors, because we cannot build resilient EU-based infrastructure on research and manufacturing of medicine without private capital. So the question is it attractive enough compared to US or other geopolitical entities? And again, I'm not fully convinced. The previous speaker, expert from European Commission, outlined that at the end, the protection, when we put together all three kinds of protections, or even more, they can increase from 11 to 13 years for orphans, or to 12 years for other medicines. However, they are not granted. So if I were an investor, and I was deciding whether to invest into Europe or other place, I cannot count because it's not granted. So, I mean, I understand also why, because it's complex, but I feel that the strategy and the priority should be really boost up of the European infrastructure, production capacities. And this, I'm not convinced that it leads to it. With those transferable vouchers, this is also part of the incentives, I think it goes good direction. It offers some flexibility. It could be questioned by perhaps generics producers. However, I think if we want to attract innovative players in Europe, it is a good direction. So basically, to sum up, the package will be a hot topic in Brussels bubble. Unfortunately, and this is my private opinion, is that politically on the highest level, simply the health aspects are not put on equal footing compared to, for example, I would say this Repower EU strategies to have more renewables, to do agriculture, green policies. So this Green Deal climate policy has more, I would say, attracts more the time of key players in the European Commissions. I mean, the commissioners themselves, and simply the health is always a little bit behind. And I don't agree with it. I said it even on the SANTE committee that if it is necessary, we should install less solar panels and invest more into new antibiotics and innovative treatments, research. And you could have seen the reaction of one MEP colleague from the Green political group. It was not a microphone, but it was it was quite mean. So I think this also needs to be improved. And as this has been said, we are 1 year prior European elections, and this is something that can reshuffle again the priorities, rethink, I would say, management approach, plan, do, check, act, and in the next political period, I hope we will have more focus and more budget on health issues, and also more political priority from the top EU officials. So, ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for inviting me, and please enjoy this timely event. Many thanks.
And I thank to Ondřej Knotek, member of the European Parliament. Thank you to Brussels, and thank you also for raising the question that I will later pose to other speakers here as if the proposal, as it lays on the table right now, is a good incentive for attracting investment into European Union. But for now, from Brussels, we move to London, from where we can get more detailed information about the newest findings of the Wait report on root causes of unavailability and delay in the EU. What data is it based on? What are the main causes and which of them are the most relevant for the Czech Republic? Those are the questions for Tim Wilsdon, Vice President, and Hannah Armstrong, Senior Associate of Life Sciences Practice of Charles River Associates. So Tim and Hannah, I hope we can hear each other.
We can hear you. I hope you can hear us.
Perfect. So, so far we don't see you, but we have the sound, and I hope we'll get also the picture. But we have your presentation, so if I may, I give you the stage or the virtual stage to get to know more from your analysis. So the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to talk to you today. And apologies if you can't see my face. I will share this presentation with Hannah, so she'll join in later on. What we want to go over for the next 20 minutes is just to take a little bit of a step back, I suppose, and say what are the evidence we have to support this debate. What has the industry developed in terms of some of the thinking of the underlying causes, and looking a little bit to the future as to how we can track these. So we're going to go through not all of these reports in a lot of detail, you'll be relieved to know, but we'll touch upon the Wait report. Many of you will know the Wait report monitors availability, reimbursement effectively across European countries, and has done this for many years. So it allows us to compare across countries and across time. So a really useful data set. The next report, the one me and Hannah have had more responsibility for, is to say the why. What are the root causes? And going back to some of the things that have already been mentioned, and putting a little bit of a structure as to how the industry thinks about these. And then we'll talk about a brand new report which was released just the day after the general pharmaceutical legislation proposal, which looks at how do we track this? How do we measure this? How do we measure progress towards this subject, which I think we all agree is a priority for patients and should be a priority for all of us. So we're going to cover these three reports with a big focus on the middle one, because I think the name of the conference today is about the root causes and answers. So this middle one is probably the most important of the three. If you look at the Wait report, and Anthony showed a similar picture using different data, we all agree that there's big differences in availability, in the length of time to availability across European countries. And this isn't good for patients, it's not good for sustaining innovation, it's not good for society. So there is a lot of agreement here as to the fundamental problem. I think the conference today reflects everyone has an interest in solving this, and it's not a new problem. We've had these big differences in availability and delay for many years. Germany often being the fastest country. We've included Malta in the Wait study, so even bigger variation, with Czechia being in the middle. And realistically, bigger variation than this. This is the average. For some products, it takes much, much longer. In some countries, this is the national number, but we've got regional processes going on. And this is just availability. Obviously, patient access has other barriers in terms of that as well. So I think there is a lot of agreement across all stakeholders on the problem, and that's good. That's good news. So we've made a step along the way. We all agree on what we're trying to solve. The interesting part for us was a couple of years ago, EFPIA saying, well, yes, but we don't necessarily agree on why. What are the root causes of this? And in fact, we've got a bit of a finger pointing situation where the industry says it's very bureaucratic pricing and reimbursement processes, and that's the reason. And other stakeholders say, well, it's because of the industry's strategic decisions, launch sequencing, decision to launch, and kind of fingers pointed at in both directions. And the idea of this root causes paper was to say, well, let's look at the evidence we have, as imperfect as it is, and say, what are these root causes? Why do we have it? And we came to the conclusion at the bottom, it's both. It's the environment we have and the rules and regulations we have at the European level and the member state level, and the impact that has on company decision making. There's no point us pointing fingers. It's an interrelated problem, and we can only solve this problem together. So that's the headline. I suppose what came out of it, hopefully as a useful tool that can be discussed as we go through today, is this diagnosis of these root causes. And we came up with 5. And there's all different ways of categorizing this, we accept. But the first is that Europe is, the regulatory process is ending later than in other regions, and we don't always have access between the regulatory process and the pricing and reimbursement process. So this time to marketing authorization, early access is really important. The second is the pricing and reimbursement process, the start of it, but also the duration of it varies across European countries. And it's very interesting hearing some of the progress incorporated in that. We have the value assessment process. So how do we align on evidence, price to evidence, what kind of products the different countries want? And then we have health system readiness, and Anthony referred to some of this already. Do we have the diagnostic regime? Do we have the budget to pay for these? And then realistically, in some countries, it's not just a national process. So we hope that this at least gives us a framework for talking about the root causes. It isn't potentially particularly contentious, hopefully, and we've talked about this an awful lot by this stage. Hopefully most people can agree these are the main blocks. We can disagree as to which are the most important ones, but I think hopefully this is a useful framework at least. And we know in Czechia there's some that are particularly interesting, which we've put in yellow, which I'm sure are going to come up later in the day, and I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. So it's a short report. It explains how we came to these 10 root causes, and then put some academic evidence to explain the proof point behind it to show its material. And I just want to highlight, I know these will be very small on your screen today, but just to highlight a little bit of the evidence. So on the initiation process, this is part of the, well, why does it take this long? Well, in some countries, we obviously have access immediately on marketing authorization, but that's not very common. Normally, there is a process that needs to be started. Sometimes that's through the company, but sometimes it's through other stakeholders. And sometimes there's conditions on the starting of the process. You need a certain number of HTA assessments to have been done, or reference pricing to occur before you can start the process. In other cases, it is a decision, and a decision that depends on the resources at hand. So you can see in the top right, this tiny picture looks at availability across countries for big companies and small companies. And we can see small companies find it much more difficult to launch across all of the markets in Europe than big countries. A bit obvious, but I think the first time there was really evidence of this. And then in the bottom right, once we've got initiation, and that initiation of the process varies depending on the rules when we can apply for marketing for pricing and reimbursement, there is a length of time for that process, for the value assessment part of the process, and then the pricing and reimbursement negotiation. And that's set across countries and varies. And so we have this kind of systematic differences that we already can observe based on the rules. So just in terms of initiation and length of the process, there are a set of rules and there are a set of decisions made by companies. It's both. It's not one or the other. If you look at the next one I'll focus on is misalignment of value and price. This is a huge issue. Obviously, we've got the evidence base that goes through HTA, and then we've got the negotiation. Does the price reflect the value of the medicine and different types of medicine? And I think one of the things we've observed is there's different mechanisms and flexibilities across European countries. So one proxy for that is managed entry agreements or risk-sharing agreements. Yes, in lots of countries, we've got financial possibilities of doing that, but not in all countries are we able to take into account outcomes where that's useful to have more complicated forms of agreement. And we've clearly got this varying across European countries. Lots of financial agreements are possible, but where do we have the capability to have these more complicated agreements where we need them? And that clearly varies, and that's a barrier to aligning price and value. And then you've got this complicated picture at the bottom, which says, well, in some countries, we value class-based competitors more than others. And in some countries through procurement or through reference pricing, we're largely saying, well, if we've got one product on the market, we're not sure we necessarily need 2 or 3 more. And that means often we're seeing that we have one member of a class across European countries, but some countries have 3 or 4 competitors in that, and other countries don't. And that's a choice. It's a choice by countries to encourage class competitors, and it's a choice by companies to launch them. Again, interrelated. It's not the company's decision or the rules, it's the environment impacting the decision-making process. And then the last one, sorry, too many words on this slide, we've got huge variation, we know, in Europe in how much we're funding healthcare. This is just a part of the inevitability. We have different levels of income in Europe. We have different choices about how much we're investing in health. Therefore, it shouldn't be a surprise from an economist's perspective, we see slightly different levels of availability and access. But we also have differences in the infrastructure, as Anthony was saying, centers of excellence, diagnostic regime. If we can't diagnose patients, it seems intuitive that companies are going to be less encouraged to enter into those markets if we're not going to actually be able to find the patients in the first place. So there's underlying reasons. Many of these are hopefully we can all nod along to. So this report goes through these, it sets it out, and it provides a diagnostic mechanism. I won't go through this because I know Thomas is going to talk through these in a bit more detail. But each of the root causes needs a solution. We can't just have one hammer is not going to solve this problem because we have a multifactorial problem. And so we need a multifactorial solution. And that's going to be at the European level, but also at the member state level. I suppose an interesting thing that, and we'll touch on this briefly, is we also need to be able to monitor this. It's all very well us having these great big reports, we've written some of them, but what we need to be able to do is monitor how solutions lead to improvement. And I suppose one of the most, I think, interesting things that EFPIA has done is launch this portal, which allows us to follow the root causes over time. But Hannah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tim. So I'm going to spend just now 5 minutes running you through this additional piece of analysis, so the European Access Hurdles Portal. If we go to the next slide, we can start by saying that the portal, unlike the weight data, this is the first report that's been released based on the analysis. The portal was created just over a year ago in April 2022, catalyzed by, as Tim mentioned, this kind of shared recognition and shared appreciation from industry, policymakers, patients, multiple stakeholders in Europe, that the delays that we see and the variation in speed of access to innovative medicines is a complex challenge, and the aim or the intention of this portal was to look in real terms at individual products that receive centralized marketing authorization in Europe, and to work with companies on a product-specific basis to increase understanding and then in aggregate terms, increase transparency regarding some of these factors you see on the right here, and primarily the root causes of unavailability in delay. So the analysis that we're presenting just now was published just last month. And so this represents the initial report and preliminary results, which are intended to shed some light on some of these factors on the right-hand side, but this will be built on over time as the data set matures, much like we've seen over the years with the patient weight data. So what data are we actually able to talk about today? In the portal and the analysis that was published last month, we have data on 32 products, all innovative medicines, which reassuringly to us represented a 91% participation rate of the EFPIA member companies who were eligible to participate. And by eligibility, we mean we were looking specifically at products that received EMA approval between January 2021 and June 2022, so an 18-month window. And given this variation, and products may have been approved at the beginning of this or towards the end of this period, we need to consider that on average we're looking at products in this data set that have been on the market or have received marketing authorization on average just 14 months before this analysis was conducted. So our intention with the portal is that the data set will mature over time, and we will have increasing number of products that have been on the market for an increasing number of time. But to contextualize the analysis we're presenting today, this is just a 14-month into the product's time on the European market. But if we are able to compare if we look on the right-hand side of this slide, if we're able to compare these 32 products with every product that was approved by the EMA in this time, we do see that they're similar in terms of balance across different therapy areas. So this suggests the data set is small, or is immature and will mature over time, but is at this stage at least representative of that larger data set that we hope to get to over time. So from looking at these 32 products after 14 months, our first conclusion is, I suppose, based on the data just shown on the previous slide, is that there's clearly a willingness from industry, from companies here, to provide more transparency on some of the root causes and to add new data, new information that can be used at a country level, perhaps at a European level, to help have these conversations and to help tackle these challenges collaboratively and in a evidence-based way. If we look across 4 kind of key research questions that the portal focused on in its initial analysis, spelled out here, speed of marketing authorization was not the primary focus, but our analysis was consistent with the broader literature and broader understanding that in many cases at the time that products receive regulatory approval in Europe, these products may have received regulatory approval in other regions much sooner. So the process has already experienced somewhat of a delay compared to international benchmarks at this first step. But then the primary focus on the portal was on the 3 pillars to the right here. So firstly, just looking at across countries at the status of products filing for pricing and reimbursement and ultimately being reimbursed and being available to patients. So on top of weight data, which shows unavailability, it shows to some extent delay across countries. The portal here provides some additional detail on the status of product filing, which isn't captured by the patient weight data. And we see that in many instances where products are unavailable, which weight has captured and we've built on over the years, we see that unavailability often means products have been filed for reimbursement but have not yet been reimbursed. And we do naturally, as we do with weight, see geographical variation in the report, with lower proportions of filing and of reimbursement of innovative medicines in Central and Eastern Europe, for example. If we look at the speed at which companies are filing for reimbursement and that those products receive a reimbursement decision, this also, for the first time, we have some data on the length of delayed availability, which is due to different steps of the process. So from marketing authorization to reimbursement, we have some understanding of that delay as a result of the weight data. But now we can break that down a bit more and understand how much of that time is due to a company's decision to file that medicine for reimbursement, and then of how long the process takes to achieve reimbursement. And it seems from this initial analysis that around 25% of that time is due to the filing step, and 75% due to the delayed reimbursement decisions. And then finally, linking back to Tim's presentation just now on some of the root causes for that delay, looking at instances where products hadn't been filed for reimbursement or hadn't been reimbursed, we find very variable and multifactorial reasons for why this might be, and of course, again, some variation across countries. But looking at aggregate terms, the most common reasons stemmed from the requirements of the pricing and reimbursement decision-making process, which Tim just covered in his presentation, and as well the health system itself and its readiness, its constraints and capacity to adopt and fund new medicines. So although we only have preliminary results at the moment, and not the time today to go into all of the the granular specifics. Our hope with the portal is that the data will continue to build and accumulate and mature over time. And the intention of the industry certainly is that the portal can be used to shed more light on some of these root causes in more detail, and support the decisions and the discussion that needs to be had on the most appropriate solution.
And I suppose what we'd all really like to see is these availability rates becoming more uniform and the delays becoming smaller, and as addressing some of the root causes. So I think this hopefully is a useful tool. So last slide. So just to summarize what we've got, hopefully we've got some useful tools to diagnose the problem. We've always had the weight data. Hopefully the framework, the root causes framework, is something we can all agree, and then we can discuss what are the most important ones and what do we do about it. We hope this is a step forward. So if you haven't had a chance, they're not hugely long reports. That was one of the things we've tried to do here, is keep them relatively short. Please have a look at the root causes. The portal paper is much newer. This is going to evolve, so questions as to how that can improve, very welcome. We think this is a framework that will be useful for Czechia, even in some of the discussions we've had just preparing for this conference. They clearly, some of these factors seem more important than others. But I suppose the last thing, if we remember anything from this presentation, is that the root causes are multifactorial. It's not all because of one decision or another decision. It's because of the decisions we make together in terms of the rules and the framework and the evidence and the environment, in terms of the submission and the evidence and the negotiation that follows. We can only actually solve this by working together across the different root causes, and by coming to a solution that leads to a quicker process collectively. So I'll stop at that point and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you for your inputs. That was nice to hear some numbers or results of some analysis, even though we have a still quite short timeline for the Hurdle portal, but well, still good. Yeah, we will get to the discussion, but first we still get a bit of a, let's say, hint of a solution. Our next speaker leads EFPIA's focus group on pricing and market access, worked in Australia and New Zealand, and now focuses on Europe. So he could tell us more about the factors that enable timely access to innovative medicines based on practical perspectives from different healthcare systems. Welcome here on stage Matt Slabbert, Vice President and the Global Head of Pharma Public Affairs of Bayer, and Chairperson of the EFPIA's Pricing and Access Focus Group. Welcome, the stage is yours.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here in person today, and thanks again for the opportunity to speak to everyone. So just a quick background about myself. So I'm originally a pharmacologist by training, but I did spend quite a bit of time in Australia working in the area of market access, particularly 10 years there and 5 years leading the function both for Australia and New Zealand. And actually during this presentation, I will draw a lot on that sort of practical experience working in those countries, because even though they're geographically quite close to each other, the way and the approach to funding medicines is actually quite fundamentally different. And that results in some pretty big differences in access to medicines. And I'll speak a bit about my experience there, and hopefully, when reflecting about what the Commission has proposed, you can think, will the proposals actually work towards solving some of these underlying causes that impact timely access? Since 2020, I have actually moved to a global position based in Berlin, and I work in public affairs, so I sit on a lot of different committees for trade associations, including EFPIA, AIFPMA, Pharma, so very much more in the public policy space, and indeed, have done a lot of work with the EFPIA in terms of preparing for the legislative change ahead. Just a quick disclaimer, today's presentation is really my own personal opinion. It's not an official position of Bayer AG, and I'm really just here to try give a practical perspective from a very different market to Czech. Sorry. So how will I kind of structure this presentation? First, I'll go into some of these root causes. I think Tim did a great job in already highlighting some of the key ones, and indeed the work that EFPIA has done with the Access Portal is looking to really build an evidence base there to see what are some of the key drivers across Europe. And I think having an evidence-based discussion for assessing policy impacts is absolutely fundamental. So it's really important work. The second part, as I said, I'll show a bit of other comparisons that Pharma did across the OECD when it comes to access to medicines, and just highlight the differences that both Australia and New Zealand has in terms of time to access and availability. And then finally, just sort of drawing from that experience or that hands-on experience working as a market access head in a country, what did I find as some of sort of the universal enablers to timely access? So as Tim also mentioned, these root causes that drive the variation in timely access, I mean, they are fundamentally interrelated and they influence each other. I think, I'll first start off with talking about, the healthcare system unmet needs. And this is also whether the system has the capability to actually identify and quantify its own unmet needs. And that has a lot to do with, in terms of data infrastructure, academic institutions, epidemiology, whether there's sufficient evidence base to actually understand what the remaining unmet needs are within the system. And of course, what the system's willingness to pay is to actually address these unmet needs. Coming back, just a few words on the differences between Australia and New Zealand. So Australia is a universal-based healthcare system. It's got a single-payer system. All medicines are funded, most medicines are funded through the PBS, and it goes through a fairly complex HTA process. There's a central committee called PBAC that actually determine the cost effectiveness of a product. And interesting thing there is, the remit of the government is not to procure medicines, but rather to purchase health outcomes. So, each medicine actually has a determined cost effectiveness, and it's the cost effective price that actually determines the actual price that gets funded, and that's actually enshrined in law. So this has been a system that has, a younger country that had the opportunity to look across the world and build health policy and legislative structure to really see what would be a best case in terms of, keeping competitive, stimulating investment into at least bringing medicines to the country. And to mention before that some countries, they actually value inter-class competition. So Australia is one of those. They actually have a concept called clinical equipoise or clinical interchangeability. And if there are drugs of a similar class that they determine to be clinically equivalent, they all compete basically for the same envelope of money. So it doesn't block any new medicines coming into the system. And that's a very important point. Whereas New Zealand, has a procurement agency called Pharmac, which got established in the early 90s. And, from a philosophy perspective, they had the mission of basically just managing a budget, managing a medicine budget. That was their purpose, their mandate. And that's a very different philosophy to what Australia took. And in that system, basically, they operate through tenders. There's also portfolio bundle deals that happen a lot. And, it's a lot of times, the lowest, cheapest drug captures the entire market, and there's just a single option available for a therapeutic class, which really undermines, remaining unmet needs for patients in that system. So I'll come to some graphs in a second just to see how drastic the alteration is. And then the second one, I think, both Antony and Tim mentioned this about healthcare readiness, or, is there a sufficient place in therapy for a new medicine? So particularly for new precision oncology medicines, as well as some of the more advanced ones, it can be fairly challenging to navigate a patient pathway, and whether there is a sufficient diagnostic base available and whether the system can actually adopt the technology. And I've seen this play out as well between the two countries, where Australia had, certain hubs of excellence where New Zealand lacked that, and it just had a quite stark difference in terms of whether a sufficient place in therapy was available. Also, in terms of resource and capacity on the ground for on the government side, the HTA body side, to actually assess, the new medicines. Again, very different. In Australia, that it was well-resourced through the Department of Health. They had a whole tender process to look for different university HTA groups, so there was a lot of expertise within the country. Where on the Pharmac side, their advisory committees that drew into, clinician advice, it was very pro bono, very random, there wasn't any consistency on when these committees met, so it wasn't quite the same, whereas in Australia, it was very regulated under a certain calendar. There was a lot of transparency in the process. Every time that a drug also was considered, these were, the rationale for the decision was publicly made available, all on a very scheduled time frame, very consistent. And then also in terms of complexity of the process, I think across systems, there's a high variance in terms of how the process actually happens. In some countries, of course, there's reference pricing to other systems required, as well as a HTA assessment. And this can also have big impacts in terms of timeliness. Indeed, in Australia, there was no referencing to other systems. They really, again, went by the cost effectiveness measure that they themselves had evaluated for Australia, recognizing that they are purchasing health outcomes for that system to address a local unmet need. And again, so this next point is, again, this difference between a predictable, value-based approach, very evidence-based, that has a consistency in decision-making, so you can actually track how the body, PBAC, makes decisions. So there's a real emphasis on them to keeping a consistency along those lines, and having a transparency behind their assessments is hugely helpful for people working in companies on the ground. We negotiate with our headquarter colleagues to really find a path forward for a medicine within a particular system. And this transparency, of course, helps us build credibility with our global colleagues. Flip that then to the New Zealand system, which was purposefully very opaque, very secretive. They thought that, not being transparent or being opaque was a somehow negotiation edge, which really it wasn't, because what happened was then, as an individual working in a country, people would bring up proposals, and then that wouldn't happen. That would happen 2 times, 3 times, and then people just didn't find the local person credible at all because the system wasn't predictable. You couldn't really move forward. And then also just a topic I'll go in a little bit deeper detail, which is just inherently about health technology assessment. So there's some inherent challenges that remain in HTA, and this is not something that is exclusive to Europe. This is really, really global. Things such as the assessment methodology, how a system actually incorporates stakeholder perspectives, that of the patient, which I'll talk about in a second, but also from various clinicians, clinical colleges, these type of aspects is quite important. And of course the sponsor as well, which are actually the developer of the medicine. And then finally, the communication of the decision making, I think, is absolutely vital. How transparent is the communication? How structured is that? How is it easily to follow? And finally, I think Tim also highlighted this in terms of data quality, data requirements. Inherently, clinical trials have constraints by nature. There's always a requirement to try to translate that outcome of a clinical trial into what it means for the system, how relevant it is. And this is really one of the core challenges that every HTA authority has, is looking at the applicability of clinical trial evidence to that particular system. And then, of course, I mentioned data infrastructure. That's also a big thing. In Australia, really one of the, let's say, global best practices I've seen is they had a very strong investment into data infrastructure very early on. that you could really track drug utilization, even by indication level, throughout the entire PBS. And a lot of this information was also publicly available, public analysis. Anyone could check on a website. We had agencies that actually specialized in really doing some amazing analysis with this data. And that really, just made every conversation, every price negotiation so much more evidence-based, the fact that you're actually working from real data. So that is an extremely important aspect. And then importantly on the patient voice, I mean, there's also, a variation of how patient perspectives are really considered within the decision-making process. Some countries have done various different ways of incorporating it. I think it's vitally important because the patient experience brings a much broader perspective than some of these potentially much more narrow, objective HTA measures. Insights into quality of life and the impact that a certain medicine can have on a patient could actually be quite informative in terms of assessing that unmet need that's still there for certain communities. So this is also, I think, an ongoing piece that's evolving around the globe. Now, coming to just what the differences are between Australia and New Zealand. So this report is done by Pharma. It got published in April. It's very different to the weight indicator, I might add. So it's looking at a very long period, just one period, 10-year period in 2012 to 2021. And launch medicines here, or new medicines generally launch, just means registered and available in the country, so by prescription. Doesn't mean reimbursed, it just means registered. And you can see, in terms of time to that market, there's quite a significant difference between Australia and New Zealand in that 10-year period. And furthermore, when it comes to actually the reimbursement differences, I mean, in the OECD, New Zealand is last. It is bare last. And this is really, from my perspective, driven both by its approach, its willingness to pay, its whole philosophy around how they go about funding medicines versus the Australian approach and the Australian philosophy. And finally, I mean, just time, I mismarked the arrow there, but again, Australia is still quite a while up versus New Zealand, which is still last in terms of timely access. So finally, I just wanted to talk a bit about some practical challenges and implications and whether I can give maybe a little bit of perspective being someone previously on this company side in the country. I think the people that work in the local affiliates for global pharma companies, they really are the advocates for that country within the organization. They really look for different solutions, different ways to get a drug funded within that country. And I don't, sometimes payers and other stakeholders locally don't really appreciate how much those people are advocating for that cause internally. As I said, anything around the process that aids consistency, transparency on, how, when, why decisions are made, helps build credibility, not just for the system, but also for those advocates internally in the company that are negotiating with headquarter colleagues, trying to make the case to launch a product much earlier. And then another thing I have to say also, in terms of how systems look at having sufficient flexibility in the system to anticipate scientific advancement is also something that particularly on the reimbursement side. We heard from the Commission there was a lot of activity on the regulatory side. I have to say on the reimbursement side, which is obviously much more member state competence, this is also vitally important. And I've had some experience, driving the reimbursement of a precision oncology medicine, a pan-tumor product. And again, the Australian way was really to, listen to the science, listen to the rationale. This was a single-arm trial for very good reason, and not just to dismiss the science and the rationale behind that. And the way that they engaged, ultimately a solution was found to reimburse that product. And so systems need to, I think, not look for one-off solutions, but think of a way of how to build in these types of flexibilities to allow for advancements in science and technology as new modalities come online. And then finally, just as a leave-away message, when market access can be highly technical, there's a lot of policy, there's a lot of different methodology, different approaches, it can be highly complex. But if I really have to boil down to two things, I think anything that either establishes trust among stakeholders and enables a real evidence-based dialogue is ultimately something I think is universally beneficial for timely access. And with that, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Matt Slabbert, thank you. We also have questions for you, so you'll need a microphone later on. But I'll start with Mr. Rodiadis, because there are many questions for you. So I hope we are still in touch, we can still hear each other. And I start with a question that we've received, and also Tin is there, that we received from our audience. To receive the 2-year extension of RDP, does it mean that the company has to file for pricing and reimbursement in all member states? Is this step sufficient?
Great, thank you. I mean, this is a great dialogue, and I see a lot of connecting points here, and I've been reading the Slido questions, which I will also try to address as well. So essentially, just to go to this question, I mean, the answer is it depends. Because what the regulation requires, actually the directive requires, is to have actual supply of the medicine, which, if you're talking about a reimbursed medicine, that would probably mean that you would need to go through the whole process. I mean, if you're talking about an over-the-counter medicine, then possibly you would not need to have these pricing reimbursement decisions, obviously. And also, back to the detail I mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily 27, it's really all the member states that the marketing authorization is valid in. So basically, if you're talking about an EU-wide marketing authorization, yes, it would have to be the 27 member states. If it's a decentralized, it would have to be less than that. And finally, again, bringing your attention to the pragmatic approach in this market launch mechanism, it is possible that you have a waiver or a tacit agreement from the member state. So in order not to block unjustly or without a real justification the extension for the company. This is all in Article 82.
Thank you. I'll continue with a question to Matt. As in Australia and New Zealand, you had different models of access strategies. What does it mean for clinical trials?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, actually, given New Zealand's approach, let's talk a bit about in the area of oncology. The way that they went by it, was so restrictive that clinical practice had moved on. Global, standards of care in certain oncology fields had actually moved on because some products were reimbursed in most of the world. And then actually clinical trials required that comparator to obviously be part of it. So the trials stopped obviously being feasible in New Zealand due to the fact that they had fallen so far behind in global clinical practice.
Thank you. A question to Tim and Antonio. We've heard that from the MP, the European, the member of European Parliament, sorry, Ondřej Knotek. Europe is lagging behind US as it comes to number of innovations, investment into pharma. Do you think proposals of European Commission on changes in regulatory data protection will help to change it? So probably let's start with Tim and then Antonio will react.
Okay, it's certainly true. We've done some analysis on the trends, and the US and China they've got impressive growth in some of these metrics. R&D investment being a particular one, but also our employment. So there is a gap to be worried about, and something that we should be trying to do in Europe to address that gap. I suppose as was said, I think we're all digesting what was in the proposals, I think that there are some concerns. And one is about what information is taken into account in decision making. And in our discussing this with R&D experts within the companies, you need a degree of certainty, and you tend to base this on the patent length. You also will base this on what you know for certain, and that could well be the baseline RDP. And so I think there is a real concern, and it's something that I suppose everyone's looking at and analysing at the moment, that although the overall potential exclusivity may go up, what's taken into account in decision making is what you can be certain about, and that could well be the baseline. And I think this is something that everyone's worried about, because if it is the baseline, it's gone down. And that's not a good signal to be sending to innovators when Europe is, we're starting to see this gap emerge. There's an inflection point in 2018-19 where the US pulled away, and this is the wrong direction to go.
Thank you.
Well,
Antonio?
I have two things to say on this. I mean, first, the question really is Europe a place where a company would like to invest in, produce, you know, and market its medicines? To answer this question, I mean, you have, okay, let's say that the incentive system was the only factor to answer this question. Even with a reduction of 2 years on the baseline, which is true if a company doesn't do anything at all to bring more access, it would have 2 less years. There's a very interesting table in our evaluation impact assessment where even shows basically that even with this reduction, we would be the same or over, you know, countries like Japan, China, Canada, Israel, even for the United States for the chemicals. So even the reduced baseline, if you compare it to other regions, is up to par. But I assume companies would like to work more and go over that. And there we have actually an increased situation compared to the baseline, not to mention that IP protection is not at all affected by this at all. So you still have SPCs and IP exactly the same as you have today. But there is a second element to this question, and I think is the most important one. Am I going to invest in the EU? You need to look at the broader picture. Is the EU, does it have an attractive system? Is it future-proof? Is it simple to use? There's tons of elements in this revision that go towards that direction. And finally, if you go even broader, you know, with other factors like what we're doing in the European health data space, primary, secondary use of data, not to mention, you know, the presence of industrial capital and knowledge management and talent, this is really what affects an investment decision in a region, not just the you know, data protection, which, as I said, even if you isolate it, still is not less than other places.
Thank you. Matt, I would like you to react on that, and also at your point of view, how does it differ, the motivation to invest in New Zealand and Australia, taking in consideration the different systems?
Yeah, let me do the last bit first, then I'll react to what Anthony said. I mean, in Australia and New Zealand, of course, there's a geographical component. It's quite far away from the world. But CSL recently actually opened a vaccine facility there for manufacturing in Australia. So there is that element of investment. But in terms of R&D investment, it's really clinical trials that's the majority. And of course, I just mentioned before what drives the difference to that. In terms of what Anthony just mentioned, of course, decisions where for a global company to actually have a footprint in R&D is multifactorial as well. I bear in mind, you know, yes, it's not just about RDP, but if you look at Europe on the demand side, you know, in terms of the access policies that are happening at a member state level, I mean, some of the pricing reform, you know, for example, just what happened in Germany with the Financial Stabilization Act, you know, it's layer upon layer. It's a compounding factor. So when you also reduce the IP framework, and I think RDP, you know, you can talk about semantics about whether it's IP or not, it is effectively IP. You know, you are degrading the overall framework and predictability in terms of whether you're going to meet these conditions, how pragmatic is that mechanism. So I think, you know, when you look at the US and China, you know, if you look at how clinical trials and spending is looking at. I think CRA, Tim did a great report about this last year, where he looked at the CAGRs of R&D investment across the different regions. And yes, you know, Europe is falling behind. My question is this proposal going to accelerate that gap or close it? And I would, you know, personally, not on behalf of my company, but I would say that it doesn't look like it would accelerate it.
Thank you. Antonio, don't you want to react still?
Yes, I would like to use a part of Matt's presentation, which I thought was very, very telling and very going to the right direction. You mentioned that, you know, we need to have purchase, where the member states or you know, the users need to purchase cost effectiveness, for instance. So we're not talking about a system where a member state is presented a product and saying, you know, here it is, take it or leave it. What we're really trying to do here is create those bridges between, you know, upstream and downstream actors, so that the member states are able to really get the products that they need and get them in a timely fashion. Now, this requires, and also something you said, Matt, creation of trust and evidence-based dialogue. And this, I think, is key. And I think it's also, you can see it in the revision, where you see what is key here is the having, let's say, a good faith between all the actors. And the fact that, you know, there is now these bridges in terms of, you know, creating clinical, comparative clinical trials, bringing in downstream actors into defining what is an unmet medical need. And ultimately also saying, you know, we are able to, you know, to pay more for these types of medicines. And we will reward companies that go the extra mile. Basically, this one-size-fits-all system doesn't really cater to the needs of today's society. And unfortunately, I mean, the EU is a diverse place, which is great if you want to go on a road trip. But if it's, you know, when you have 27 different health budgets, you have to take that into account as well, and enable those different processes to create the right decisions. And final point here, in terms of, you know, what practices work and what practices don't work at national level, there's a lot of work being done in the NCAPR group, the group of national competent authorities on pricing and reimbursement, where essentially also these best practices are being discussed as a further enabler outside the legislation, also to enable the dialogue. Because we believe that, you know, pharmaceutical companies want to put their products on the market. They don't want to have them somewhere in a warehouse. We just need to enable this dialogue and create the cooperation required. So the carrots are there. There's no sticks. There's more carrots here. And it just needs a little bit of more effort from all parties.
Thank you. And I choose one last question because we are running out of time. So I ask Hannah, because there's a question aimed at her. You've spoken about the European Access Hurdle Portal and mentioned that portal has been built together with member states and regulators. Can you elaborate more which ones and how they participated while building the portal?
I'm happy to clarify, and apologies if I misspoke, but to clarify, the portal is an industry-led initiative, so only pharmaceutical companies have submitted the data that we've just presented. In mentioning other stakeholders, we mean that industry share the concern of those stakeholders, of member states, of regulators, of policymakers, regarding the observed delays and rates of unavailability. But the portal is the industry-led mechanism of supporting that dialogue.
Thank you. So it's really about cooperation, predictability, and trust. And it's good to have some data to base it on that. So thank you. Thank you for your answers. Thank you to Antonio Rodiadis, Tim Wilsdon, Hannah Armstrong, and also Matt Slabbert. And now we'll have a short break, after which we'll continue with some more examples how we could solve the problems we have. But now let's have 15 minutes. Let's try that. So 15-minute break so that we meet 5 minutes after half. So 25 to 12. Let's make it 15 minutes, please, and then meet here. You may take the coffee with you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I'm sorry for disturbing you from your discussions. I'm pretty sure you'll still have the chance to continue with meeting all others and discussing all the topics that we are talking here today about. At the first part, we've outlined the situation. We spoke about barriers, but also about examples and possibilities, how those barriers could be overcome. Now we are going to focus on this part, meaning finding solutions. For example, value-based pricing, one way of improving the market access for new innovative medicines, but we are not going to hear only about that. Let me now give the floor to Thomas Allvin, Executive Director for Strategy and Healthcare Systems at the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, who is behind all EFPIA's thoughts on how to improve the actual situation. And you may ask him questions already while he will be presenting, because he is going to answer them right after his presentation. So, Thomas, welcome. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm really glad to be here, and thanks so much for the invitation. So I will now have the unenviable task to follow on all these great presentations from before the coffee break, and try to talk more about the solutions. I think, though, it's easy because some of the solutions have already been mentioned. There's a lot of good things to come back to. So what I would like to do is actually try to summarize a bit what we've heard about the barriers for availability and access across EU countries, and what could be the package of solutions needed to tackle that. And to do that, I would like to start with this slide, because this is basically going to be the structure of this presentation. So you remember this slide from Tim Wilsdon's presentation on the different root causes for unavailability and access delays, starting with, of course, the regulatory process, and then the pricing reimbursement process, value assessment process, etc. And here are the things I'm going to talk about. What can we do to ensure a speedy initiation of the process in the countries? I'm going to talk about the commitment, the industry commitment to file. Going to talk about, can the EU HTA regulation help with a misalignment on evidence requirements? I'm going to talk about value-based pricing, because I think misalignment on value and price, which is really what the pricing negotiation is all about. What should we pay for this new product is a huge factor. Can value-based pricing help? How can new types of payment models, what we call novel payment models, help on a lot of these issues, both the misalignment on evidence requirements, misalignment on between value and price, and also affordability and budget room, and their last coming to the proposal for equity-based tiered pricing. Can that also help in improving equity of access within Europe, which is really a goal we all share? And finally, I'll come back to the Commission proposal that we heard of before the coffee break, and give some comments on that before I close. So starting with the first part, and in some way the simplest part. So here we are at this sort of first access hurdle, which is the initiation of the process. So of course, before that, you remember the regulatory phase needs to work, a fast regulatory process. Hopefully the Commission proposal can there bring some improvements to the EU regulatory system that can speed it up. It was very positive to hear the Commission representatives say they want to close the gap with other regions in that regard. So we're very much hoping for that. Also, early access models, of course, important. But to start the pricing reimbursement process in the countries, of course, here industry plays a role in filing for pricing reimbursement in different countries. You could see the data from the weight report and the different delays that are dependent on a number of factors. But the industry will want to do our part. So for around a year ago, EFPIA members published a commitment to file for pricing reimbursement in all EU 27 member states as soon as possible after central authorization by the EMA, and no later than 2 years. So this is a time limit we gave ourselves across all EU countries, provided that local systems allow it. As we heard it, in some countries you need to wait for processes in other countries that could delay it. But this is the EFPIA commitment and something we plan to live up to. And you also heard about the access portal that Tim talked about, where you can actually track now how long does it take for different products to file for pricing and reimbursement in different countries. So this is how we plan to do our part for this first part on initiating the process. Then, of course, the rest of the process is very much in the hands of the member state authorities. Then we have, of course, the back one slide. On the misalignment when it comes to evidence requirements, which is another, of course, huge piece. Here we have, of course, the currently being implemented, the EU HTA regulation that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And here, of course, the vision, and this is something that EFPIA and the industry has been very supportive of from the start, is to try to create a more harmonized and streamlined system for doing clinical assessments in Europe. So moving from what we have today, where different countries have very different data sets they want to include in the clinical assessment, and what type of data. So, of course, clinical trial data, but what about different type of cost factors, real-world evidence, etc., patient-reported outcomes. So they have different standards, and the vision is, of course, to create a unified EU standard for doing the clinical assessments, the first part sort of the HTA assessment. So this is something we have been hoping a lot for will improve and speed up and make more equal access to innovative medicines throughout Europe. Now, here I should say, you know, the proof is really in the pudding right now on how this should be implemented, and it is, of course, a huge challenge and the task for all stakeholders, and of course, including the member state authorities who need to align their processes. So we can see here before, again, we have, if we think four different countries, they have 4 different ways to do the clinical assessment of what kind of data requirements are needed to do that. And then, of course, they have the national aspects in terms of, you know, costs, health economic assessment, that always need to be a national thing, because this varies. Also, healthcare system priorities vary. So there's always a national element. But so what we would like to move to is what you see on the upper right slide, where the clinical assessment part has been harmonized in terms of what are the evidence requirements, what kind of data does the pharmaceutical companies need to produce and submit. And then you will still have the different requirements for the national part of doing sort of the cost effectiveness, if that's what's being done, or looking at the budget impact aspects, ethical aspects, etc. That will always be a member state priority. Now, there is a risk, however, and I think we can see it happening now as we see this now being implemented and we hear the discussions, that we'll end up in the bottom scenario where still, you know, member states want to keep their data requirement and just bundle it in the big EU pile, which would end up with actually you didn't change much. You just took 27 different or how many different data requirements we're talking about in different countries and just putting them in a huge pile at the EU level. So you actually didn't streamline anything, and you could even risk having more delays than we have today. That's, of course, what we want to avoid. So I think it's extremely important, this implementation process, and also the involvement of all stakeholders in that, to make sure that this actually will live up to the promise of the HTA regulation when it was proposed. So on the next step here, sorry, no, I'll go back. which is really about the sort of misalignment between value and price, which is one of course, the key components of any negotiation. Where, of course, when you have innovative medicines that are protected, you have sort of a monopoly meeting sort of a monopsony in terms of a member states or a price reimbursement agency or procurer buying for a whole country or setting the price. You need to have a pricing negotiation guided by some set of principles. And EFPIA recently worked with the Office of Health Economics in the UK for a report on value-based approach to pricing. Of course, this is not something new, but to really collect what are the evidence, how is value-based pricing working in Europe, why is this the most rational approach to go about how you price innovative medicines. And yeah, there was supposed to be a scale there that fell off, but it doesn't really matter. What's important about value-based pricing that if we can have a system where the price of an innovative medicine is in relation to the value it brings to patients, but also to broader societies, that will achieve a triple win for all parties. So the health systems, the payers, they know that they will get value for money. You get what you pay for. And so to go back to Matt's presentation, it's a philosophy of we're buying health outcomes. That's what we are going to reward. Is innovation, is health outcomes, and is value for patients and society. And of course, patients get to win because, of course, this should include what's important for patients. What are the outcomes important for patients? They should be included in this value assessment process. So that's where the system will put their money is for value. So they will win, and the industry will win because the companies will get the signals from the countries that this is what we value. We value these things, so this is what we will pay more for or pay an extra reward for. So you get a signal back to the whole R&D process. Invest in these things, invest in what's important for patients. That will pay off later. And then you get a system that works end to end. Of course, this is sort of easier said than done, easy in theory. How do you implement it? So in this report, that I'm sure we can circulate later for those who are interested, we looked at a number of countries. How are they implementing a value-based approach to pricing? And I will come to that in a later slide. But I think that in theory, most countries in Europe try to be value-based more or less. But there's really a sliding scale on how successful that is and what other kind of factors that kind of disturbs the value signal. Of course, in order to have a value-based approach to pricing, you need to do two things. We're going to simplify it. You need, of course, to assess the value. So what do you put into value? What do you mean by that? And how do you assess it? And the other part is, of course, not to be forgotten, how does the value translate into the price? So do you have a threshold? Do you have a cost per quality? There are different ways of doing it, but how does that translate into the pricing negotiation and the final price? Does it actually reward? And how much do we value, a quality life year for a patient, for instance? So, of course, what is value? And there's a lot written about this, but we like to think of it both in terms of value to patients, for health systems and societies. And of course, different innovative medicines will score differently on these different parameters. Nothing is equal. But of course, the value for patients, of course, the most important, and why we innovate, of course, improvement in patients' health. It can be increased survival, of course, but also, of course, quality of life and functional status. Can they go back to social life? Can they go back to work? Do they daily living activities? Also improvements in the process of care. So if I can now take a pill, a tablet, instead of having an injectable or having to go to the hospital to get a transfusion, huge improvement for the patient and probably also their families. Is this valued by health systems? Sometimes, sometimes not. And then the innovators get the signal, we don't value these things, don't bother. Value to health systems. You can replace, of course, other care practices or therapies that are in place. You get cost offsets. If you can prevent complications, thinking cardiovascular, diabetes, you prevent people from going to hospital or acquiring, needing sick leave, etc. You prevent a lot of other unnecessary costs in the system. This is also value. And of course, to the broader society, patients being able to go back to work, reduce burden on informal carers, thinking in Alzheimer's, family members that needed to support someone with Alzheimer's, and the time they spend on that, being off work, etc. That's also value if that can be improved. So when we looked at this, and we looked at a number of countries that are doing different versions of value assessments and what they're putting in the pile, and I will not go through all of this right now, but just to show that there is a different pictures, health outcomes, everyone is obviously looking at that. You can still put different things into that. How do you look at patient-reported outcomes? Is that looked at in a serious way or not, or is it just hard clinical outcomes? You can dig more into all of these factors. And when you start getting down to sort of the indirect costs and indirect medical costs, so the broader health systems costs for societies, then it's clear some are doing it, but many are not. So this is, of course, a very important part of the value-based pricing. What do we put into the assessments? And then we also have other disturbing factors that although a number of countries are doing some version of a value-based approach, at least using some of these variables, many countries also use other pricing mechanisms that goes in the other direction and sort of disturbs this value signal. So this can be external reference pricing, so we tag it to other countries' prices, or other measures to control the pharmaceutical budget, or therapeutic referencing, where we have a big bag of medicines targeting the roughly same indication, and we want them to be priced alike, although they actually don't deliver the exact same value for the patient. And all of these things will sort of disrupt the positive signals coming from a value-based approach to pricing. So we have a number of recommendations in this report and in the EFPIA paper. I won't go through all of them in detail, but I think it's very important in the first part there that develop a shared definition of value with all stakeholders. To have a discussion also at the national level, not only the EU HTA system, but at national level, what do we mean by value? What do we want to deliver broadly in the health systems, and with all stakeholders on board, including, of course, the patients, very important, the clinicians, and everyone else. So what is value for us, and having that meaningful involvement of patients and others in that value assessment process, and having this holistic societal perspective. Then sort of fully embrace the value-based approach, trying to get rid of other pricing signals that disturbs it. And then, try to extend the value-based pricing to the indication level. So which is the first step, have an indication-based pricing. So if an oncology medicine brings more value for one tumor rather than another, the more value should be rewarded more, and the other less. So again, you pay for what you get. And then, of course, maximize the benefits of value-based pricing through complementary tools, including outcomes-based agreements, and I'll come to them in sort of the next slide. You need the data collection infrastructure, etc. There's a number of other recommendations I hope that you will read later. But that brings me on to the issue of novel payment models, which is a very important tool to deal with a lot of these access hurdles we've been talking about. Is evidence requirement misalignment, is on value and price, also affordability. I mean, we are living in an era, very exciting scientific era, when we have all these new breakthrough therapies coming that would have sounded like science fiction a number of decades ago, gene therapies, cell therapies, and many other things that really is a paradigm shift in how you treat patients. So in hemophilia, instead of a patient having to go every third or seventh day to a hospital to get this replacement therapy injected. There can now be a one-off gene therapy to repair the faulty genes that should produce this protein that is needed for the blood coagulation. So it's a huge game changer. But of course, some of these therapies, they come with challenges for health systems. Some are made for very small patient populations, so you have very small clinical trials. You don't necessarily, you have a normal clinical trial. You don't know, will this still work in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? You know, there's a promise of a sort of a cure, of a lifetime effect. Will that be there? There are uncertainties, and you have single-arm trials, all of these things that's been mentioned. And many of these come with a high one-off cost. So the sticker price is high and will replace what was previously a chronic treatment. So in the case of hemophilia, that will be spread out over the lifetime of a patient. So how do we re-engineer the models? We need new models. And I think that's also coming back to what Matt and others said. You know, we have now sort of in the Commission proposal a regulatory sandbox for the regulatory authorization at the EMA. We also need sort of sandboxes at the national price and reimbursement level to experiment with new types of models. So here we have, you know, outcomes-based agreements. So how do we tag, you know, the reimbursement to outcomes? This has been used very successfully. For instance, the Zolgensma, you know, this gene therapy by Novartis, they did outcomes-based deals in many countries. So basically, if it doesn't deliver, you get your money back, basically. That's what it's about. Then it can be constructed in different ways. Has been done with many CAR-T therapies. In Germany, Italy, they've done outcomes-based deals where they track how patients respond to the therapy, and then there are rebates if it didn't work as well as was promised. So this is really the future for these type of therapies, and this is also often combined with the overtime payments, where you can stagger payments and pay sort of in installments, often combined with, if the outcomes are there, then you pay the next installment and the next. So this has been done again in Italy, Germany, other countries. This of course requires the possibility to do this from a sort of accounting perspective, and you need the data system to track the outcomes. You can track the patients and see, do their health outcomes improve? Is it sustainable? So I know we're running against the clock, so I will just very briefly say that we also want to discuss with all member states equity-based tiered pricing. How can we have a system where the prices vary depending on the ability to pay, which is of course different between Sweden and Romania. They should not pay the same price. How can we make a more rational system for that is guarded by a guardian, a third party who knows what the actual net price is and can see that this system works? I think this is something that we need to discuss together. So finally, I would like to come back to the Commission proposal and make some remarks on that, because you can see here a whole bag of things we need to do. The Commission hopes that they can fix better access with the stroke of a pen in Brussels. We are not so convinced. So as you heard, they will reduce regulatory data protection from 8 years to 6 years. That's basically protecting innovative medicines from generic competitors for this period of time. And those 2 years can then be retained in the new medicines released in all 27 countries and continuously supplied. Now, this sounds great on paper, so why will it not work? Well, first of all, RDP has all these incentives. They are there to encourage investors to invest in a very long and risky R&D process to develop a new medicine. So it's all about going back to the predictability. These decisions on investing in a new R&D project are taken many, many years before market access in Europe. So how will an investor know, or a pharma company know, how will the market access situation look 10 years later, 5 years later, 15 years later? It's impossible to know. So this disrupts the entire predictability of the system. And when you look at the release and continuous supply, I mean, in most countries, well, you need to go through the price and reimbursement process. And you remember the EFPIA commitment, the companies are committing to start to file for pricing and reimbursement, but we don't control the rest of the process. That's a negotiation with the member state authorities. So we can't control when that will end, how long the negotiation will drag out for. So basically it's an unpredictability because it's not only in the controls of the companies, so they no longer know and cannot affect, will it be 8 years or 6 years, which again has a huge difference from an investor standpoint. So you create a lot of uncertainties. In some countries, you might be able to go around this by launching it on the private market and not having it reimbursed. How will that help patients if they have to pay the full price? You're not looking at actual access, which is what we want to improve. So although we have the same goal as the European Commission, as all member states, having more equal access, but in order to do that, we need to dig into the weeds on all these root causes. How do we solve them? And there, I agree with Anthony from the Commission. We need to change the mentality. We hope that the EFPIA commitment to file in all countries shows that the industry wants that. We want to change the mentality, but then we need to discuss it and have a similar commitment from the member states to then also pick this up and go through the pricing reimbursement and actually reward innovation that brings value to patients. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you. You've already answered the question that came for you, which was if you could name the three key parts that are most dangerous or that has the potential to harm the market the most. But what reactions do you have so far to your suggestions?
Yeah, so I think that the EFPIA proposals on the commitment to file for price and reimbursement, also the portal, I think has been broadly welcomed, and it was even I think quoted in some Commission paper that EFPIA has made this commitment. Of course, not all pharma companies are members of EFPIA, are not covered. Of course, we would want them to join. So for any other industry associations and companies that are listening, please join this commitment and join the portal so that we can really get it covered. I think that of course it's understandable. The European Commission, they have what the tools they have. They have EU legislation and they see this demand. We need better equal access. So they do something in the legislation that they have. But as I think we've been talking about for the full day, the barriers to access is not sort of at the Brussels level. It's not in the incentive system. That's what needed to get investors to invest, so we get new medicines. But the root causes behind the access delays are others. So it's the wrong tool for that problem.
And we've seen the points at the graphics already at the morning part. Thomas, Allvin, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
And now let's zoom in on Czech Republic. When comparing various European countries, we are doing quite well, but still could do better. What are the main challenges for the Czech Republic? This is a topic for David Kolář, the Executive Director of the Association of Innovative Pharmaceutical Industry. The last one in English, but you may ask questions in English or Czech, whatever you prefer, but we'll answer them right after that at the panel discussion.
Misha, thank you very much. I promise, because that's my second time here for today, so I'll be brief because we are everybody looking forward to the panel discussion. I know that the Deputy Minister is needing to leave in 20-25 minutes, so I will be brief. What is my goal of the presentation? It's to really, let's say, show the basic example how one system is robust and comprehensive. And the question, which was in my welcome speech, was if the proposal itself is having the potential to change and to close the gap between the systems. I will give you some practical information about the Czech system. I will be on a high level because I know that most of you know the system, but to give one practical example. I really like this EU vision, which is on the side of the European Commission. I have only one question. I will not, let's say, answer it, whether the instruments which were chosen by the Commission are the right to, let's say, really get to these objectives. But let's come to the Czech system. Just really 3 basic slides about the current situation and state of play. You saw the weight report. I think that you already saw the presentation from Antonios, and he was showing the comparison since 2012 to 2016. So we can say that from the number of molecules which enter the market, only enter the market, I'm not speaking about the availability of the treatment itself, Czech Republic is much better than it was in the past. And that's, I think, the good sign that we really was successful in the previous time. What is also the necessary to take into consideration is that current spending on the pharmaceuticals is around 15%. We are somewhere in the average. And also that even in the case that in last years we are seeing the higher investments into healthcare itself, the percentage which is allocated to the drugs is slightly decreasing. You can see that from 2017 to 2020, it's 2% less. What is the goal of every pricing and reimbursement system? I think that it is really to try to find a balance, to establish the rules, how to balance these 2 aspects which are they are interconnected. Yeah, the financial sustainability of the system, of course, from long-term perspective, and also timely broad access of the innovative treatment. We are speaking about the innovation. I know that the complexity of the system, and there are much other purposes, but this is one which I would like to show you for today's. And AIFP is, of course, committed to searching for the balance, because even if there is too much focus on the financial sustainability, then there is no innovation. Even if there is pressure to get everything into the system without the conditions, then there are no money to pay for these innovations, even though they are available. So we need to try to find a balance. Tim was speaking about the root causes. You saw the table. On the right side, I got just some of the examples of the conditions which are necessary to be fulfilled by the marketing authorization holder to get the treatment into the Czech reimbursement system. I will speak about them a little bit more. I was searching in the internet about the basic 1-sentence general prescription, or let's say description, of the Czech reimbursement system, and this is the definition. And because it's not really easy to find somebody who can describe it in 1 sentence, I used the ChatGPT, which was able to do it. Yeah, so this is the basic description. I think it's connected to the balance I was speaking about. Even ChatGPT knows this. And this is my presumption. I will go through the presentation with it. So I think that the Czech system, current setup, is having enough instruments to be able to find the balance between the sustainability and the availability of the innovative treatment. These are the rules everybody almost in the Czech Republic knows, of course, the basic rules for the maximum prices and for the reimbursement. And that's, let's say, first, I would not say obstacle. I would say that it's the condition, yeah, how to get to the treatment. In most of the cases and for most of the products, it's necessary to wait for another free markets to go successfully through the process. Even though we are able to start the procedure, you need to wait for free markets to get the price itself. Even though if we are speaking about the current situation when almost every innovative treatment and drug which is entering the market is having the cost-sharing agreement with the payer, and the real price which is agreed is much lower than it is from the perspective of the referencing. So there's the question, and it's a little bit suggestive, of course. Do we still need to stick with this rule? Isn't it a little bit obsolete, and cannot this be a way how to, let's say, make the process even faster? Another condition is the willingness to pay in Czech system. Of course, the Czech system is having the cost effectiveness of the intervention, which is estimated by the cost utility analysis, and the threshold which is set or used by the SUKL is 1.2 million Czech crown per QALY. It's there for years in the system, and even though we are seeing now that ministry is saying that there is no real threshold set it in the law, it is something which is used in the practice. The question is whether there is no time to, let's say, change this threshold, whether there is no time to start the discussion about different levels for different drugs, because it's same threshold for everything. And it is not really hand-to-hand what Matt was saying about the value-based pricing. Also, the willingness to pay is not used for orphans and WILPs, but in practice it is, because it's a part of the negotiations with the health insurance companies. This brings me to the study, yes, Innovation for Life, which was done by the association in recent years. And the goal was to really bring the examples and the evidence that the innovation is bringing not only, let's say, improvement in the health of the people, but also savings on the side of the social budgets. Yeah, here are two examples. I will not go really through. But the goal was to really demonstrate that there is added value. And this added value brings me to the proposal, the methodology, which we are working on at the AIFP right now, and it's the value-based pricing for the Czech Republic. Value-based pricing is based on a really complex evaluation of several criteria which are set, and it can really, let's say, make adequate reimbursement for the drug which is able to put the evidence about its value to the system. In reality, it can really mean that from a current system, for certain drugs, the reimbursement could be higher, but also for certain drugs, it could be lower than it is now, because the drug needs to really prove itself. And it is something which we are working with. It's not final yet, so I will not go really through the detail, and it will be introduced after it's ready. Another point, and it's one of the last I'm having, because I promised I will be brief, is the cost-sharing agreements with payers. We are, in most of the cases, saying risk-sharing agreements, but in current status in Czech Republic, it's more like cost-sharing. This is not my quote, it's the quote by Pavel Sedláček. Sorry, Pavel, I took it from you. But I really like it, because we are not sharing the risk. There is no risk, because we know, and we are just sharing the costs for now. What is there and what's necessary also to say, because we had the discussion with Michaela today, sorry, Michaela, like, what are the biggest obstacles, how to get to the market? And Michaela was saying, like, there is nothing like discussions with the payers in the system itself, in the law. Yeah, it's not there, but in reality, currently, every innovative treatment which is coming to the market needs to have the agreement with the payers. It's somehow informal condition to enter the system. It's also based on the latest and recent decisions of the Ministry of Health, and it somehow established imbalance between parties in the proceedings. Here I'm not having the suggestive question. I'm having some possible improvements and some proposals for it. So first is higher flexibility in the financial agreements, which is connected to the value-based pricing. And the second one is more frequent use of performance-based managed entry agreements. I know that this is not the fault of the health insurance companies, that we are not able to use it, because the basic obstacle is the level of digitalization of the Czech healthcare and the way how we are using, working, and evaluating the health data. And this is something which needs to be changed to be able to implement these models. There are also other instruments, reference groups, pseudo-reference groups, prescription criteria, indication criteria, portfolio deals, and others. I will not go into detail. But in these 6 minutes, I just briefly described a number of conditions which are there for entering the innovative treatment into the Czech system. And it's just Czech system. We got 26 other systems. And this brings me back to the question which I put it there in the beginning. Is the proposal by the Commission, is it having the potential to solve the gap? I don't see any part of the proposal which is targeting any of these which I put it on the slides. So I think that from my point of view, the trouble is that the biggest root cause of different availability of the treatment in different markets are the markets itself. Yeah, the difference between the system, we are not having the one, we are having 27, and that's the reason why we are having differences and delays. With this, I promised I will be brief, so I hope that I was brief. And now we are going to the panel discussion. I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you for your attention.
David Kolář. raise the topic for the next panel discussion, which will be held in Czech, which means I am going to switch into Czech language. Yes, we are going to focus on the Czech Republic. Tak tedy změna jazyku.
So let's open the panel discussion where we'll try to find a solution and discuss views of individual players, stakeholders of the entire game. Game setting rules. If I may, I would like to invite our panelist Jakub Dvořáček, the Vice Minister of Health. He has to leave a little bit. Irena Storová, Director of the SUKL, Jiří Štěrba, Head of Pricing Department and Medical Devices of the General Health Insurance Company, René Břečťan of the Czech Association for Rare Diseases, and Pavel Sedláček, Chairman of the Board of Directors of AIFP. Microphones. You all have it in front of you, and I would like to organize the first round of questions. So let's start with you. How do you perceive the current situation in the Czech Republic, or potentially what changes are needed? Briefly, please. Yeah, I know we are slightly delayed. So first of all, we have to admit that as the system in the Czech Republic is currently set, it allows significantly higher access to innovation than before. So we should respect it and appreciate that for time being we are able to fund it. I would say the last 5 to 6 years were really successful for innovation in the Czech medical care, which is demonstrated also by the AIFP figures that confirm the GDP in the Czech Republic and accessibility of innovation, for instance, looking to White Report. So it is quite decent success, I would say, and looking to availability, accessibility of innovative medical devices over the time, thanks to SUKL, we have improved a lot also. And the question is to what extent the pharma package would contribute to that. And then speaking about launches, mandatory launches that will be organized throughout all 27 member states of EU, how it will contribute to the situation. Well, you don't look really convinced. Well, I can hardly imagine how this is going to be organized. Launch is one thing, and filing is mandatory filing of documents is the other issue, and of course the market holder decision is the other issue, and then approval, disapproval, other issue, and the feasibility of individual system. So it will be difficult to demonstrate it in different systems. Nevertheless, I would say that we will see it in the upcoming 12 to 18 months, and we will definitely see a compromise. I would say that it is set in higher level than the industry was willing to give away. Nevertheless, unless having the incentive set right, then we will experience the situation as demonstrated in many medical devices or innovative pharmaceuticals in the rare diseases, and then of course it's the health insurance company that files the authorization, and in fact we will experience, or we have experienced many cases where the holders did not bother to apply it.
You've already outlined a possible solution that our system needs. I wonder if I should let the health insurance company here to respond, if you'd like to say what changes are needed by the system. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps I'll be playing the troublemaker role because I am here on behalf of insurance companies. Well, probably there'll be more troublemakers here today. However, as for the changes, I must say that we are discussing them very broadly in the VZP management and, well, in general. And because the system is set up is that patients partly have access to state-of-the-art therapy. This is definitely correct to ensure, but the risks would be to be able to fund everything realistically going forward. So the negotiation options that we had in the past have been somewhat narrowed down. Our aim is to not block market access, but to ensure, on the other hand, as fast as possible that there is availability of highly innovative medicines where we have got, well, because of the ministry and the State Institute for Drug Control, SUCL, and surely I believe we should look at it more broadly, because many European countries can learn from us, also Western European countries, what these stakeholders have done in the Czech Republic. That's indeed a great progress forward for the better. But on behalf of VZP, I'd like to say that naturally we are planning to propose and discuss changes, whether it's in orphans or the highly innovative medicines, the WILP medicines, because we have some procedures set up currently. However, there is a hindering factor that also other legislation needs amending. We can't really evaluate some data, and I do hope that data will be reported correctly. So that needs to be addressed. And another issue that we are addressing in the highly innovative medications, well, what about combination therapies? Okay, so I understand that we are on a good path, we are improving, but yes, improvement is always possible. And data, okay, data is what's needed, and we've heard from Matt how important it is to work with data. And then, Irena, let me now turn to you. It has been mentioned a couple of times that possibly in the Czech Republic it may be worth a while to perhaps change reference pricing. How do you see the whole system? You have mentioned the changes for the better. What further changes are you planning? Thank you for the floor. I do agree with the Deputy Minister to a great extent. Yes, there are changes that we can be preparing at national level. However, for a couple of years, we'll probably be all discussing the Pharma package, and that will be reflected in the national issues for sure too. And we do welcome that. And I can say that as we went through the initial proposal that has been published, we didn't find any major surprises there. Most of the changes contained there at general level at this stage. So this is what's probably causing some reactions at this stage. However, all that basically reflects the need. Well, in my introductory speech, I mentioned some specific things, and I meet with my European counterparts, also the EMA. Many things mentioned at our meetings have been sort of transformed into this legislation. So we see it as a technical reform with many technical details, and as for the aspects with some political feel, well, I don't want to comment on that, because surely a long path will need to be traveled there. So we do support it by and large. And as for some specifics, as the vouchers, for instance, I would like to refrain from comments, positive and negative, because it's very general at this stage. Sorry. Oh, well, yes, it's just marginal. Yes, it's just one part that, however, started to be discussed a lot. But let's see what the practical consequences would be. If it is to have an effect, it will have to be really elaborated in detail. But to move to how we can contribute here, so on behalf of Cycle, I can say one thing. I'm very happy that we could take a look at the 2 weight reports and see the progress over time. Well, I could have multiple comments about how to interpret these results, but we do want to contribute through our activities and all those efforts. So from the perspective of the market authorization agenda, the State Institute for Drug Control in 2022 was involved in 12 centralized procedures, which is good, I think, for the Czech Republic as rapporteur or co-rapporteur. And that actually has brought us to the top 10 European countries, such as Germany, France, and others. So our colleagues are very active there. We would be even more, but then we are struggling with staffing capacities. And in some next round, we can then comment on pricing and reimbursement, the interpretation possibilities, but I'd like to also give room to others. Okay, thank you very much. I'm also interested in hearing patients' opinion, because patients are those who are at stake. From your perspective, how does the Czech system work and how could it work? I'm very happy that it is about us, with us. We got involved last year and we're very grateful for this possibility to become engaged. The system is set up for orphans, for us patients, is fine, and we're very happy that there is this possibility, and also that we have a vision that will have availability of therapies. It's perhaps too early to draw conclusions for orphans, but I'm very grateful that we can jointly discuss this with all the stakeholders on board. I do understand what the insurance companies are saying. However, I think that perhaps it's a bit frightening. It doesn't mean that we would be against that and would say that the system can bear it all, but no. I think that the route for orphans surely can't be unlimited. This is not the case. It has been shown a couple of times that the pricing discussions reflect a certain basket of prices, reference prices in the EU. So for me, well, how best to put it, we have to say what we want, and I certainly would not want to say to patients, well, yes for you, no for somebody else. I really want to see efficient medicines to make their way in the system that really are beneficial for patients, and those that don't have such benefit probably won't make it there. What is important for us is that the hope is out there, and when we speak about availability, ensuring availability for patients, I'm actually saying that it doesn't mean that all the patients will indeed get hold of those medicines, will be able to get to them. When we always follow reports of newly authorized medicines, there are, say, 2 or 3 each month that are authorized. It doesn't mean that all of them are launched in the Czech market. The market has to be prepared, and also the professional society needs to be prepared, and let's continue to cultivate this. Okay, thank you very much. And now the same question for producers, manufacturers. So how do you see the situation, Pavel? So where do you see the benefits? Well, what we need for further improvement, data. Would you like to comment? Good afternoon. I would like to take a slightly different perspective perspective. I don't want to repeat what has already been said by the previous speakers. The attitude of each and every country to the health of its citizens is always extremely crucial, and essentially it predicts the success of that country. If we take a look at health, we can see it as a cost, or we can see health as something that allows you to be successful. I always say that the Czech Republic is on the borderline between the West and the East, and the Weight report shows that nicely. We are the best in Eastern Europe, and we are, well, say in the second half, so to speak, of Western countries. I would like to move up to the higher tiers of Western Europe, and certainly this is also the aim of others. Here we must and should invest in health. It's not just a nice word, but it is very wise as well. And I really like what Matt has said about Australia as opposed to New Zealand. We should be a country that invests in outcomes. Somebody who buys health rather than somebody who tries to buy cheap, do the tenders, and then find out 10 years later that the world has changed and we have no access. However, to move to a more positive note, but, well, I'm actually saying positive things, just like where we should be heading, because all of us are citizens and probably all of us will be patients. For instance, I now have acute backache, so yes, I really know what it means to be a patient from my own experience, but our aim should be to make further progress. And David, in his words, has mentioned a couple of barriers for the speed of market access. So we could see the average of 500 days or 300 days, an average or 200 HDA. So we can work on that, reducing that further and speeding up availability. And I assume that all of us, different stakeholders, could start working on a new system that would speed up the access of Czech patients to innovative medicines and treatments. And I would like to call for solutions. So let's work on a new system that will help us make further progress towards the situation of Australia, towards moving to the first half of Western Europe. Oh, well, it's nice sort of like dividing the roles, like but who would like to start? So how do we speed it up? David has outlined something, and well, at what stage does the health insurance company come into play? What about the reimbursement and all that? Because, you know, I'm not an expert on that. So can you please explain the details to me, if you may? But let me start from a different perspective, if I may. We're speaking about the patient innovations, making them available. And the system has certain limitations. What is ahead of us is searching for making the system efficient rather than having further resources in the system. Well, I already asked you that question, Jakub. Are we closer to the Australian or New Zealand scenario? Well, I think that at this stage, we don't always know what we are paying for. So we let a lot of technologies in the system we think that will help the patient, which is great. Most of these technologies at the time of authorization have data that are not entirely mature. Probably most of us here will agree with that. If we look at the first-in-class innovations, well, no myths, but first-in-class, it's very hard to work with real data. The clinical assessments don't really contain it. This should change thanks to the Pharma package. But we in the system will need to seek some savings to be able to put that in the innovations. And the question is, what does the system need most at this stage? Is it prevention? Is it in general increasing availability availability of care, not just pharmacotherapy, but say screenings, access to screenings and other areas. If you have a restricted budget, then to be able to let in innovations in the systems at the same pace, we'll need to seek savings elsewhere. So we'll need to invest a lot in prevention and early diagnostics, timely diagnostics, so that the financial package for innovation can be found in the system. This, at first sight, may not be positive news for the pharma industry, but I don't want it to be seen in a negative way, because thanks to savings and thanks to greater efficiency of the system, and also thanks to having data at hand to be able to prove that the innovation has brought the effect, will it be justifiable in the harder times that are probably awaiting us in funding for healthcare? Thank you very much. And Jiří would like to respond very briefly. Well, thank you very much. I would really like to support that. You mean that, like, the pharma industry is not going to be happy with it? No. That we need to seek efficiency in the healthcare system. If you would recall this line that pharmacotherapy, that's just 15 costs of the whole system. I believe that we need to see the efficiency of the whole Czech healthcare system, where the Deputy Minister is saying we are letting new technologies in. Pharmacotechnologies are the only ones that are undergoing HTA. Medical devices are only just starting, but then there are billions and billions we are letting in the system without any findings whatsoever, whether they work and whether they are efficient. Do you agree? Yes? You really need to take a thorough look at it, because to look just at 15% out of 100 will never lead to any result. Who would like to now take the floor? Jiří or Irena? Who would like to respond? Thank you. Can you hear me? Well, if I may, well, in the Czech Republic, it's some 500 days time to reimbursement. So we also mentioned the 300 days, Mrs. Storová, didn't we? And we also do make some calculations, but it's also very much linked to one thing. If the holders could file the day following authorization, well, yes, that would definitely be beneficial. And then, as the, say, 99% of negotiations is something that I take part in. Often it happens that, for instance, we are negotiating one medicine, the company council offers 2%, and we say, oh, well, good, that's an interesting discount. But perhaps do we need to look around Europe, and you have already -20 there. And then we are getting to the situation that well, if we need to, for instance, go through 3 or 4 negotiations with representatives of the company, and well, yes, I do understand it. If I was at the headquarters, I would definitely not say it that in the Czech Republic that, you know, in Germany or France, I already have a 20% discount. In the case of one orphan, business secret was revealed that there was a discount of 39%. And, you know, I wonder why we in the Czech Republic should we be paying more? The EU, well, it should be a single market. So what we see is that as there is the delay in the availability, the access, orphans, I wouldn't only blame the state administration, the health insurance companies, assessment, cycle, and setup of legislation. No, at the same time, I think that we should be self-critical. How I, as a company, approach my intention to launch the medicine on the market, and that's another factor. Before you would like to respond, perhaps Irena Storová would like to comment, and René would as well. So, Irena, please, the floor goes to you. Well, thank you very much for the floor. Well, the gentlemen have really made a lot of interesting remarks that I wanted to comment on. I didn't write anything down, so I hope I won't forget anything. Well, we also look forward to be able to use European health data Spain's use of secondary data. Perhaps it may seem that there will be more data, but in effect, I think it will speed things up. So that's one remark that I wanted to share with you. And another concise remark, and well, thank you very much for it. All the discussions are about medicines. Well, slowly we are moving to medical devices, but it's only a bit. I have heard one theory that we are discussing this mainly because it's regulated, it has rules, and we are thinking about how to change the rules even further. And this large part that doesn't have any rules, nobody wants to dig into that. So that's naturally more difficult, isn't it? Well, yes, so that's one thing. And then as for the times, when you mentioned the 500 and 300 days, we also did some analyses. Because the weight reports always emerge and are interpreted, and our head is always about to burst for the first week after the report crops up. And in 2021, we were comparing medicines in the authorization at EMA and then filing for reimbursement in the Czech Republic. And from those data, you can see that what has a bigger impact is this time from authorization to filing for the reimbursement. Well, I have a chart here. It's probably not legible at all. But this time that it takes, the time to availability for the patient, that is, that reimbursement is set. So actually the filing is a bigger factor rather than the time to authorization. So that's one thing. And then HDA, that's also a factor. So this is related with it. We will mandatorily do the assessment part. At one point it will be ready, and then if it takes a long time before you then do the filing, then the data will be outdated. We'll have to go for another assessment because clinical practice will have advanced and so on and so forth. So may I make an appeal to you? Let's not duplicate our work, and let's not prolong the time for patients before medicine is available. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Well, it's, you know, the way that you're seating, it's like 3-1 and you're the bumper, and that's probably in reality as well. Well, yes, exactly. I'm in the middle, so, but let me move a bit so that we are fully balanced. But anyway, I'm very happy that Mrs. Storová has mentioned this availability for patients because well, we are speaking both about the Czech situation and then European situation. So patients are interested in something that has the MA so that they can get hold of the medicine as quickly as possible. There are several aspects to it. There is this whole process taking place, and we strive to shorten it or have it acceptable at least. And then there is this other time, and this is from MA to the filing in the Czech Republic. So yes, there is also room for improvement in that other part. And as for the EU level, what we've also been discussing here, I would like to say one thing. As for orphans, I didn't even hear what our actual objective is. Well, improving access and availability, reimbursement, environment, well, all of these can be our aims. But when I go back to the initial meetings in the Senate that I had during last year, the head of Rodiadis the European Patient Organization said that he expects that 600 new therapies should be brought to patients by 2030. Well, this is an entirely new dimension. That would be cosmic speed. But the reason why I am mentioning it is that we shouldn't be speaking just as like how to ensure all this, but how to rather start it up. But that is related to efficiency in development, searching for new therapeutic possibilities, etc. At European level, what we are interested in is that there would be more therapies available, because then speaking at the level of member states, whether the system can afford therapy number 1, 2, or 3, that's not a solution. At a time when we'd like to have a lot new therapies registered, the EMA, so we'll have to run in parallel. And at European level, we'll need to think about how to really making the therapies cheaper and more available at large. Pavel, you should probably respond, but I know that Jakub needs to rush, but I'd like to hear what you think about one thing, and perhaps my lay perspective is different, but it may help the system if the cost of the treatment, but also the outcome, the benefit, could be brought in. And it's very hard to calculate the benefit for the patient, but are we planning anything like that?
I think we are already doing it for rare diseases, at least partially. The soft data are getting in, and it's about our colleagues that are preparing filing. That's what the patient organization and the expert societies can address. So we are partially doing it already. And I'm talking again about the pharma package, the client evaluation, such as data collection at the filing stage at EMA would require modification of the current procedure in order to be able to evaluate the data in an easier way, both from the health insurance company and regulatory bodies. So it will be up to the business how they would approach to the pharma package requirement. If we get the data at the onset in a high quality to be able to assess the impact not only on the health system but much further, then it will be really great. But speaking about rare diseases, for me, and I think also for rare diseases patients, in order to talk about 600 or 500 new therapies, which is really an ambitious goal in order to be able to pay for it also. But we need much more in this respect. Let's say we need a more precise organization of care, clear patients' pathways, clear diagnostics system, because even now we are not able to detect all patients that require the therapy currently. So the speed of the ante is really important. Nevertheless, this is not the biggest pitfall. And I'm talking not only about rare diseases now, but I'm talking about individualized therapy. We need to identify the patient in time and to guide the patients through the pathways. So national plans, that's something what we have to improve, and then also cooperating with health insurance companies on the national plans in better way, because the payer is covering the care really needs to co-create the system. And in my view, we should intensively work both on rare diseases, the national plan, and the other diseases, oncology, cardiovascular diseases, and other illnesses also. And we need to get in touch with the European Meeting Cancer Plan and so on. So if the European Commission thought that it is one time a try, which will just trigger the demand from the patients, followed by other therapeutical areas. It was a mistake because all expert societies now push forward not only oncology but other diseases also, because oncology enjoys an extra care within Europe, but the others should follow. So for us, this is a signal how we should travel for the future, and no matter whether we are talking about rare diseases or diabetes in the future, then we are able to work on the entry data and all the follow-up data that are important for patients throughout the journey. Thank you very much. So you will miss the questions from the audience, but I'm quite sure you can just listen to it later on. Okay, thank you very much. Jakub, Dvořáček, Deputy Minister of Health, who is running two other ministries. Thank you very much. So I don't know whether anybody would like to respond to everything we have heard here, but we can just respond now. From the weight report, we can see that we are improving in the speed of gaining the reimbursement approval. Nevertheless, in fact, patients are not using fully the potential. It is truncated. So what we can do about it? Well, I don't want to answer it in this case. I don't want to blame pharma industry, because if the company requires truncating the authorization, then maybe it is maybe not nicely described, but money are the most important element. So speaking about the cost effectiveness, the indication restrictions are chosen in the way in order not to grant big discounts. So we are talking about not complied cost efficiency criteria, and unfortunately this is the situation we would have to resolve in the future anyway. But generally speaking, how to solve it in the future? We can just cancel willingness to pay, or modify it, or in some other states, once the companies would file the request to set the entire brand irrespective of indications, but I cannot imagine how it will be technically handled. Maybe so. I will just comment it in a similar way. Most of the agencies, authorization, pricing, and so we don't have the registration right, authorization right. So what I mean, what the applicant would file, then that's what we would assess. So, for instance, to get authorization for different treatments, disbursement fields and leaflets, insert leaflets, and the level of reimbursement, indication, prescription restrictions. So we receive the application, the filing, and we assess whether the provided documentation corresponds with the filing request we have received. So I think that, of course, there are certain intention behind, so it's quite clear to me. Nevertheless, that's the current system. On the other hand, if this is used for any type of benchmarking, international benchmarking, and this is also with respect to all types of weight reports. I don't know how it is handled in other countries, but in the Czech Republic, and René Břečťan would definitely confirm it, we got a number of the medicines that are outside of the reimbursement systems. Nevertheless, they are not tracked in standard databases used for standard benchmarking. So what does it mean? The reimbursement limits are not set in there as officially determined by the process, but the insurance companies had made an agreement, session 16 and so on. So we have focused on it for the orphan drugs, for instance, and just to share with you, in 2021, irrespective of filing application for reimbursement, 64 different authorized medicines was reimbursed out of 123 from EMA, and half of it, about 61, don't have any set limit for reimbursement. So this figure, realistically, for patients, what patients could get is higher than you can track in those databases. I don't suggest we should be happy with that, but we know that we are slightly better than demonstrated in the general information. Yes, it is truly like that, because, for instance, in the case of hospital medicines, the reimbursement level is not determined, so they can't be reflected in the weight reports. They are not. But me, being a patient, how can I understand it? How can I get the appropriate treatment without having appropriate contacts and not being socially capable to retrieve the information? So what should I do? So I guess that definitely requires a change. Well, I would like to respond to it, and then I would like to describe the challenge. So I would like to respond what the companies are filing, what not. It's about seeking eggs or chicken. If I set a restrictive system allowing only partial approval, then the applicants will only file the applications they hope they will be approved. They'll get the registration for. So talking about the core of the trouble, that's about what Czech Republic is willing to pay, how much Czech Republic is willing to pay for health of its inhabitants. And I'm combating with the philosophy, the health insurance is collected through tax-paying schemes. So if it will be decided to pay 100%, then everybody would pay 100%. It's not real, of course. But speaking about 9, 10, 11%, well, I think not only politicians should decide about it, but also common citizens should have a say in this discussion, because we will see the impact in 2 to 3 years. So don't blame anybody. Czech Republic is a beautiful place to live, but it can be even better. So let's work together on better access to innovative treatment. Yeah, I would like to comment it. Well, in my view, it's not about blaming each other, but we should analyze the situation, identifying what can be influenced by individual stakeholders. During my position, I always focus on the reimbursement and pricing, organizing pre-hearing, and so on. I have to say that certain expert societies are already doing it, so I have to praise them. And we really have to discuss it and find common solution. It almost sounds as a conclusion, but I have one more question. Well, I have asked one question already, but you have somehow skipped it. Did you want to respond to it, René? Yes. When you ask what you should do as a patient, I would suggest you to contact patient organization. Yes, speaking about potential solutions, you can file a CMHP opinion and cancel a request for 3 reference countries when filing the application. So it's quite interesting. So you would like to valid once CHMP, Committee for Medical Products for Human Use, would make a decision. Well, so I don't know whether we can do anything like that, but we can definitely talk about it. Well, we can speed it up somehow. I don't know whether the health insurance companies would be really grateful for it. And then those 3 reference countries. Well, we can handle it without those 3 reference countries, but of course we can talk about it. Well, I'm open to discuss it definitely, and one thing that I have to highlight is that you and us also, we have to follow the legislation. If lawyers would say it is not possible from the legal point of view, then we would have to work on the amendment of the act. We got also Milan here, so we can just talk about it internally. Yeah, of course, it's not only about reimbursement. It applies to half of our employees. We have already discussed, frankly speaking, an access for any price within 1 year, and then with the permanent reimbursement once 1 year expires. So I think it's quite an easy system for us. Thank you very much. We got several proposals. But may I just ask you, Jiří, can you please specify whether 15% for the medical medicine cost includes already discounts, or would it be possible to separate those 2 data?
Well, I can say that the costs of medicine, well, I know, but you wouldn't like to tell? Or, well, I can't really tell you the figure, even though you may hear it in the future. It's not fully official as yet. It is in the order of billions of crowns. You can probably imagine that, but, well, I don't know what it would be in the 15%, so 2% out of 50 billion. So you're not telling us, but partly telling us. Naturally, what also comes into play are multiple impacts. We enter into the price agreements, that's the direct discounts, and it would be hard to calculate the savings. The inspiration that we derive from Europe is that the simple discount agreements are concluded. Thank you very much. So you're going to have discussions, everything will speed up, and instead of 600, probably it will be 500. Okay, well, rest of the discussions can be held informally during lunch because we've exhausted the time for our panel discussion, and I would like to hand over to David Kolář. But before that, I'd like to thank all the participants in the panel debate: Pavel, Sedláček, René, Břečťan, Jiří, Štěrba, Irena, Storová, Jakub, Dvořáček, who took part in the panel, and thanks to all of you for sending your questions. My apologies that we didn't manage to ask all of them, but you can discuss some of these questions informally during lunch. But before that, David Kolář, Executive Director of the Association of Innovative Pharmaceutical Industry, would like to close the event. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. I won't really be making any summary. It has been a very complex, comprehensive debate. We moved from the EU level to the Czech level, many interconnections out there. I believe that summary that I was probably meant to deliver at the end, I already mentioned in my brief presentation. The biggest trouble is that we have so many systems and they do differ. I actually forgot to mention one thing because I was rushing so that the Deputy Minister would have enough space in the panel discussion. I actually believe that the Czech system is good for innovations. There are some weaknesses, some strengths, just as any system. And probably you can never think up an ideal system, because if that was possible, every state would have implemented it already. And what I really liked was what resonated here, that we must discuss it. And this is the key message of today. I have some concerns that in the preparation of the Pharma package, the discussion took place, but the parties didn't really listen to each other. And that's not criticism, it's just my subjective feeling. And in the Czech Republic, over the past couple of years, we've tried it out that if we listen mutually to each other and seek for consensus on all sides, we can create something that's sustainable and beneficial for patients, because this is our underlying objective, and we're definitely going to continue on that path. However, as this has been a very long event, I'd like to thank everybody. Thanks to Thomas and Matt and all the other colleagues who presented here and helped us co-create the content. So that was David Kolář, Executive Director of the Association of Innovative Pharmaceutical Industries. Thank you for this brief summary. There is no ideal system, but we'll strive to get as close to it as possible. It's about all of you. Thank you very much and enjoy lunch. Thank you and goodbye.